इसमें मीनिंग ऑफ ग्रे जोन वॉरफेयर, वाई, द एवोल्यूशन ऑफ वॉरफेयर, a diagram to explain what gray zone exactly is, characteristics of warfare, and how to counter gray zone warfare. ये अगर हमने पढ़ लिया, this would be sufficient to write any single answer, and there are also some examples etc given, right? तो सबसे पहले समझते हैं. Now let's understand this and then I'll teach you from this page only, ताकि आप आराम से इसको deliver कर सको. देखो, there is this graph that tells us about the spectrum of conflict. See, this is peace. So here is defense posture and here is intensity of that defense posture. तो यहाँ पर दिस इज हाई इंटेंस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट एंड दिस इज वॉर, राइट? तो जितना हम इस डायरेक्शन में जाते जाएंगे उतना ज़्यादा वॉर और इंटेंसिटी बढ़ेगी, और जितना हम इस डायरेक्शन में जाते जाएंगे उतना लो इंटेंसिटी एंड पीस होगा, राइट? सो बिटवीन एनी टू नेशंस there can either be deterrence, which is complete peace at low intensity, or there can be an escalation to lead to major conflict, which is high intensity war, right? अब इसके बीच में क्या होता है, right? सबसे पहले there is deterrence where there is complete peace, then there is conflict prevention, but there is a gray zone. ये है gray zone. This is the gray zone where you can't say that the countries are at peace and you can't say that limited war also has started. So even a small scale war has not started, but you can't say there is complete peace. So if you look at this escalation ladder, right? If you look at this escalation ladder, there is deterrence here, there is conflict prevention here, then there is this gray zone. The gray zone is where you have hybrid warfare or proxy warfare. So gray zone is a zone, और इस zone के बीच में there is hybrid warfare or proxy warfare happening. इसके ऊपर जब हम जाते हैं it leads to limited war, इसके और ऊपर जाते हैं it leads to major conflict. So this is the escalation ladder that we generally speak of, and this gray zone is something that's here. So it's technically defined as a no war, no peace zone. You can't say it's war, you can't say it's peace, right? तो अगर हम मीनिंग समझे सबसे पहले ग्रे जोन वॉरफेयर का, इट इज अ प्लेस ऑफ नो वॉर नो पीस, राइट? इट इज इन बिटवीन द स्पेक्ट्रम ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. तो अब इसमें क्या होता है, देयर इज हाइब्रिड टाइप ऑफ वॉरफेयर. हाइब्रिड कार्स के बारे में हमें पता है. हाइब्रिड मीन्स मिक्सचर ऑफ टू थिंग्स. सो हाइब्रिड कार्स आर मिक्सचर्स who have both EV capabilities and petrol capabilities. Hybrid warfare would be where there are both kinetic operations. Kinetic means where you move people and there is actually a military element, traditional conventional military element involved, and there are non-kinetic operations. For example, there is economic warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation, quasi military tools. Quasi military जैसे quasi federal हमने पढ़ा है, एक very small level पे military tools are being used. So it is below the threshold of armed conflict and not provoking traditional warfare. This is what gray zone technically represents. This is the meaning of the gray zone. Now why does this happen? ऐसा जोन क्यों एग्जिस्ट करता है और यहाँ पर हाइब्रिड और प्रॉक्सी वॉर क्यों होता है? देखो, कन्वेंशनल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट बिटवीन एनी टू नेशंस is very costly and it is also very risky because you can't then stop escalation, right? So countries are now looking for alternative methods to ensure their national objectives. कि हम full scale war नहीं लड़ सकते. There are also nuclear powers involved, there are a lot of weapons of mass destruction involved. तो एक perpetual तरह का irritant हम बना देते हैं, right? So एक perpetual conflict that will keep happening below the threshold of war, right? आपको इतना ज्यादा ट्रिगर नहीं करेंगे कि आप बहुत ज्यादा हाई वॉरफेयर पे चले जाओ, बट थोड़ा 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 आपको पोक करते रहेंगे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, चाइना सलामी स्लाइसिंग और पाकिस्तान यूज ऑफ प्रॉक्सी वॉरफेयर वेयर दे विल कीप सेंडिंग इन्फिल्ट्रेटर्स अक्रॉस द बॉर्डर. जब ज्यादा हो जाता है, व्हेन इट गोज बियॉन्ड अ पॉइंट, इट माइट लीड टू अ प्रॉपर वॉर लाइक इट डिड इन पहलगाम. बट इसके अलावा भी इवन टुडे पाकिस्तान वुड बी ट्राइंग टू सेंड proxies across the border and infiltrate. They would still be trying to have one or two cyber attacks on India. They would be sending drugs across the border, right? तो ये चीज चलती रहती है. And so it's a perpetual nature conflict that happens constantly, right? Below the threshold of warfare, because that particular power does not want कि traditional warfare या conventional warfare छिड़ जाए. It is like, let's say you are sitting in a classroom. Remember your school days. You're sitting in a classroom. आप बैठे हो और आपके साथ आपका एक पार्टनर बैठा है. Now your partner wants to irritate you, जो आपके साथ बैठा है. अगर वो आपको सबके सामने जोर से थप्पड़ मार दे तो टीचर विल नोटिस, राइट? टीचर को पता चल जाएगा और सबको पता चल जाएगा कि इनके बीच में लड़ाई हो रही है. बट ही इज पोक्स यू अ लिटिल बिट विद अ पेन. आपकी नोटबुक गिरा दी, आपका पेन इधर फेंक दिया, आपका होमवर्क कहीं इधर उधर कर दिया. यू कांट रियली कंप्लेन अबाउट इट. थोड़ी बात कर रहा है, आपको इरिटेट कर रहा है, राइट? तो दिस इज ग्रे जोन वॉरफेयर, बिलो द थ्रेशोल्ड ऑफ एक्चुअल वॉरफेयर, बट परपेचुअल conflict because conventional conflict is very high cost and very high risk. So an alternative method to ensure that national objectives are met. Now, there has been an evolution of warfare. So there are 6 generations of warfare actually, right? ये keywords हम use कर सकते हैं. So the first generation of warfare was physical confrontation, where armies would meet स्टेप टू फेस टू फेस, किसी बिल्कुल ट्रेडिशनल वॉरफेयर भी ऐसा है, एंड इवन विद स्मॉल आर्म्स दिस इज द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट दैट हैपेंस. फिर सेकंड जनरेशन वॉरफेयर आया वेयर देयर वाज मास फायर पावर, वेयर देयर वाज आर्टिलरी, बिग guns being used and a lot of firepower being concentrated. Then the third generation of warfare started when tanks started to be had, right? Okay, tanks would move with a lot of speed. For example, in mass fire time pe, especially the time of the First World War, trenches were very common. But now you have speed and tanks moving. This is third generation. Then started the fourth generation, which is asymmetric warfare, where two powers do not have equal powers, right? But they use asymmetric tactics like guerrilla warfare or infiltration. Then we came to non-kinetic fifth generation of warfare, where there is misinformation, cyber war, where you are not moving people, but you are using technology to have attacks. And the last or the sixth dimension now is cognitive warfare. You are trying to control the minds of the enemy. For example, India में कोई protest हो रही है. Let's say there's the farmers protest happening and some foreign power is sponsoring this protest, trying to control our minds. This is cognitive warfare. These are the 6 generations. अब अगर हम ग्रे जोन वॉरफेयर की बात करें, what are the characteristics of gray zone warfare? Firstly, it is below the military threshold, right? You will bait the other party through provocation. जैसे इजराइल हमास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में क्या हुआ? Israel kept having some very small conflict with Palestine, right? They did not invade Palestine. थोड़ा उनको इरिटेट करते गए. कभी कोई सेटलमेंट्स बना दी, कभी एक आधे लोगों को उन्होंने they kidnapped them, or they said that okay, these are terrorists, so we are removing them from this place. They took away their water, etc., etc. They baited them. Hamas got provoked and Hamas attacked them. War start कब हुआ था? ये जो अभी करंट वॉर चल रहा है. Hamas actually invaded Israel and they took 200 Israelis hostage, right? Then Israel got the pretext to invade the Gaza Strip. तो इससे पहले Hamas ने क्यों invade किया? ऐसा नहीं था कि everything was normal. They were constantly, increasing their settlements, not letting them have international shipments, taking away their rights. थोड़ा सा प्रोवोक किया, बट इट वॉज बिलो द मिलिट्री थ्रेशोल्ड. कोई देख के नहीं कह सकता कि वॉर चल रहा है. एंड हमास गॉट बेटेड इनटू द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. देन सेकंड इज यू हैव टेरिटोरियल क्लेम्स बैक्ड बाय लीगल एंड हिस्टोरिकल क्लेम्स. जैसे कि चाइना इन द साउथ चाइना सी ऑलवेज क्लेम्स ऑफ द 9 line. Now this is a false historical claim. They have lost in the permanent court of arbitration under the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea. But still, they will keep making this territorial claim. Nobody can say war is happening, but they will be making small islands there, right? Scarborough Shoal, there's Spratly Islands, Paracel Islands. ये छोटे-छोटे islands वहाँ construct कर रहे हैं, अपने claims को assert कर रहे हैं. Now, this is baiting the other party into conflict. I'm sure you're now trying to understand what gray zone warfare is. It is less intense, but more broad. Intense तो नहीं है war जितना, but बहुत सारे domains में हो रहा है. And this keyword, please remember, diplomatic, information, military, and economic domains. The 4 domains. These are the 4 most common domains. That there will be some military ability, mostly in cyber warfare. Then there will be economic domains, information warfare, as well as diplomatic warfare. Then there is policy of denial and non-attributable conflict. मतलब आप साइबर अटैक करा रहे, इंडिया पे साइबर अटैक कराया चाइना ने. It is sponsored by the Chinese Central Communist Party, but they have a non-attributability. They have a policy, they can deny it. Right? They have plausible deniability. वो कहेंगे नहीं हमने तो नहीं कराया. These are independent actors. They are acting because again below the threshold of military conflict. अगर बिल्कुल clear हो जाए कि चाइना नहीं कराया, it will lead to full scale war. So below that threshold, then there is always a risk of escalation. For example, after the 2001 parliamentary attacks on India that were executed by this person called Afzal Guru, he was clearly a Pakistan proxy. But after those 2001 parliamentary attacks, India did then go to the escalation ladder, and it was going to look like there's going to be full-scale war with Pakistan, right? So risk of escalation हमेशा रहता है. Then in gray zone warfare there are all-out efforts, right? It's not only military in various domains, but सारे domains act कर रहे हैं. And you try to target the fault lines of the enemy. जैसे इंडिया में जब farmers protest हुई, it was well known that some foreign powers were trying to make that protest even bigger. There were deep fakes being sent ताकि इंडिया में और internal conflicts हो. तो हमारी internal society के fault lines को target करता है. Now, how do you counter gray zone warfare? Firstly, you need a whole of government approach as well as whole of society approach. अकेले counter नहीं कर सकते, right? You have to remove the internal front lines from your society. आप अपनी society में एक condition ही ना create होने दो कि कोई बाहर की power sponsor करके यहाँ पे conflict start कर सके. Then, since cyber warfare is a major domain of gray zone warfare, we need to boost our technological capabilities. Then, सबको डर लगना चाहिए कि अगर conventional warfare हो गया तो you can't go to conventional war with this country. फॉर एग्जाम्पल देयर नीड्स टू बी स्ट्रॉन्ग कन्वेंशनल डिटरेंस। जैसे पाकिस्तान को हमेशा डर लगता है दैट इफ इंडिया गोज टू कन्वेंशनल वॉर विद देम दे कैन नॉट विन फ्रॉम इंडिया। This has been proven in 1971. This was proven in 2001 in Kargil, and it got proven again this time with Operation Sindoor. तो आपके कन्वेंशनल डिटरेंस स्ट्रांग होनी चाहिए। देन यू नीड टू इंटीग्रेट इनटू नेशनल सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन, एंड इसके बारे में हम बात कर चुके हैं। यू नीड टू हैव मिलिट्री रिफॉर्म सच एज इंटीग्रेटेड थिएटर कमांड्स, द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ द चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ, द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन, द आइडिया ऑफ इंडिजनाइजेशन ऑफ डिफेंस। ये सारा हम इसी की क्लास में देखेंगे। These are important, and of course a free and open press is very important, क्योंकि information campaigns are very important component of grey zone warfare. तो अगर आपकी free and open press होगी तो it will not lead to such sort of grey zone warfare, right? At least in the information domain you will be able to control any misinformation coming from abroad. Since diplomacy is also an important domain, international collaborations and soft power is also a major thing that you can do to counter this idea of grey zone warfare. अब जैसे ये टॉपिक है, हमने इसे इतना ही पढ़ना है, राइट? वील जस्ट रीड दीज कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स, वी हैव इनफ कीवर्ड्स, वी हैव सम वर्ड्स, वील बी एबल टू राइट द आंसर फ्रॉम हियर। वी आल्सो हैव एग्जांपल्स, राइट? क्योंकि इन चीजों पे अगर क्वेश्चन आ गया, जस्ट थिंक ऑफ दिस फैक्ट दैट इफ देयर इज अ क्वेश्चन ऑन दिस, मोस्ट ऑफ योर कंपेटिटर्स विल नॉट इवन नो दिस वर्ड, राइट? तो अगर आप एक दिस इज मच बेटर देन एन एवरेज आंसर, बट अगर इसमें से भी आप 5-6 कीवर्ड भी याद रख के वहां पे आपने लिख दिए, आपको मीनिंग भी क्लियर है, यू विल गेट मच मोर मार्क्स देन अदर्स, एंड दैट इज द पॉइंट हियर. Similarly, let us now go to the second topic we are doing today, which is hybrid warfare. So now let's come to hybrid warfare. देखो, hybrid warfare, again hybrid means combination of two things. तो hybrid warfare में क्या है? It is the combination of two things, which is both conventional kinetic warfare and non-kinetic warfare. Conventional kinetic warfare is, kinetic से मतलब ये है movement of armies, movement of let's say jets, tanks, etc. And there are non-conventional tactics that are combined, जैसे कि political protests में interfere करना, cyber attacks करना, disinformation, proxy warfare, psychological warfare, and the sixth domain of warfare, which is cognitive warfare. Combining these two things is hybrid warfare. Right? नाम से ही clear है. Gray zone is a zone. थोड़ी similarity है. It is during the gray zone that warfare happens in the form of hybrid warfare. I hope आप समझ आ रहा हो. Gray zone ये zone है. Right? Gray zone is this zone. Hybrid warfare is the type of warfare where these two things are getting combined. Now, what are the characteristics of hybrid warfare? देखो, hybrid warfare happens when there is asymmetry between powers. जैसे अगर आप again इंडिया पाकिस्तान का एग्जाम्पल देखो, इंडिया इज मच मोर पावरफुल, राइट? सो पाकिस्तान नोज कि कन्वेंशनल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में तो वो हमें बीट नहीं कर सकते, सो दे आर यूजिंग नाउ द टेक्निक्स ऑफ हाइब्रिड वॉरफेयर बिकॉज ऑफ दिस लार्ज एसिमेट्री बिटवीन द पावर्स. सेकंड थिंग, देयर इज वेपनाइजेशन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन. जो इंफॉर्मेशन वॉरफेयर है वो यहाँ भी होगा. देन देयर इज यूज ऑफ नॉन स्टेट प्रॉक्सीज. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, Houthis that are rebels that are present in Yemen are known to be funded and supported by Iran, and even the Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies that Iran has used to fight Israel in the past, right? अब वहीं से escalation होके आज की जो situation है वो हुई है. तो पहले अगर आप नोटिस करो, सबसे पहले Israel disintegrated the proxy of Hamas. Then through their pager attacks they killed many people of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then they finally went after Iran. तो पहले उन्होंने proxies को खत्म किया, then they went after Iran. There is coercion and intimidation in this type of warfare. There is espionage or spying and subversion. Subversion means not letting the other person rise through non-conventional tactics. अब इसका एग्जाम्पल देखते हैं. There is the example of China's 3 warfare approach in the South China Sea. यहाँ पर ये क्या कर रहे हैं? There is psychological warfare, there is media manipulation and legal claims. लीगल क्लेम्स तो हमने देखे, जैसे उन्होंने लीगल क्लेम्स किए हैं विद रिगार्ड्स टू Spratly Islands, Scarborough Shoal, Paracel Islands in the South China Sea, the idea of 9-dash line. Then media manipulation. Throughout the world आप देखोगे कि Chinese, it is known that they would sponsor people in various universities and they would write articles in favor of China. उनके खुद के जो state media हैं वो state controlled हैं, so they would keep writing articles favoring the Chinese position. And there is psychological manipulation also, right? Hezbollah and Israel का भी example है. One very clear example of this was what Russia did in Crimea. Russia first sponsored political protests and then they had a rigged referendum in Crimea. They had a blockade of Crimea. वहाँ से उन्होंने Crimea is of course a part of Ukraine. They did not let the economy of Crimea sustain. The ports did not function well. And then they sent something called Little Green Men. They sent people into Crimea. इनकी आर्मीज पे और इनकी यूनिफॉर्म्स पे किसी भी आर्मी का इंसिग्निया नहीं था. यू कुड नॉट सी दैट दे वर रशियन सोल्जर्स. उनके पीछे बस एक एक्स लिखा होता था. right? But everybody knows that they were sent by Russia. अब ये क्या है? They are sort of a proxy that they sent into Crimea, and ultimately they annexed Crimea in 2014. This is the time after this annexation that Russia was removed from the G7, G8. Earlier it was the G8, then it became the G7 when Russia was removed. Okay, then why is it happening? Firstly, because of, sorry, one second. Because of opening of diplomatic channels, people are now seeking strategic subversion of the enemy through their diplomatic means, right? By forming alliances and blocks against them. टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स हो गई हैं तो साइबर वॉर जैसी चीज़ें पॉसिबल हैं. इट इज़ ऑल्सो कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव. जैसे अभी देखो, यूएस से ड्रॉप्ड अ बंकर बस्टर बॉम्ब ऑन ईरान्स न्यूक्लियर फैसिलिटी. नटान्स न्यूक्लियर फैसिलिटी को खत्म करने के लिए उन्हें एक बंकर बस्टर बॉम्ब बनाना ड्रॉप करना पड़ा. इट इज़ अ वेरी एक्सपेंसिव पीस ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी. बट हियर दे यूज द स्टक्सनेट इन 2010. स्टक्सनेट मैंने आपको पढ़ाया था इन टर्म्स ऑफ सुपरवाइजरी कंट्रोल एंड डेटा एक्विजिशन, राइट? उन्होंने स्टक्सनेट यूज किया, एक साइबर वॉर यूज किया 2010 में, to gain control of the computers in Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, this was a very cost-effective method. Compared to the dropping of one bomb, they could have made 10,000 instances of such viruses and sent them into Iran, right? So it is cost-effective. Then there is rise of proxies globally. जैसे अगर आप देखो the Houthi rebels that we've discussed about, China funding northeast insurgents, China funding the left-wing extremists in India, and also the global interconnectivity that is happening. For example, the January 6th incident and the Mueller report, both of these speak of the Russian interference in the American elections. It is said that January 6th incident में क्या हुआ था? Donald Trump lost the election in 2020 to President Joe Biden. Then his supporters stormed the Capitol building of the US, and it was a completely misinformation based campaign. और कहीं जगह कई writers ने ये बात लिखी है that this misinformation was actually sponsored by Russia. The Mueller report was then made to check Russian interference in American elections. So this is why it is happening at the time. And जो भी ग्रे जोन के पॉइंट्स हैं वो तो आप यहाँ लिख ही सकते हो. Now, अगर हम इसका एग्जाम्पल देखें, this might be asked to us because जो डिफेंस मिनिस्टर की स्टेटमेंट थी that was on hybrid warfare with regards to India and China. तो इंडिया और चाइना के बीच में हाइब्रिड वॉरफेयर कैसे होता है? So firstly, they will do territorial aggression on the line of actual control, but it will not be complete all-out war, right? क्या होगा? They do something called salami slicing. Salami slicing is पहले थोड़ी सी टेरिटरी ली, फिर थोड़ी सी और, फिर थोड़ी सी और, एक्सेट्रा. Then they would try to do economic colonization. हम देखो हमारी कितनी ज़्यादा चाइना से देखा जाए तो ट्रेड डेफिसिट है. They are trying to infiltrate even our strategic sectors. And then they are doing an encirclement. You must be aware of the string of pearl strategy. They have a port in Pakistan. They have the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. They've taken the Cocos Island from Myanmar. They called Myanmar their blood brother. So they are trying to encircle India in the Indian Ocean and keep India boxed in South Asia. This is what China is doing. It is a form of hybrid warfare. Now, how do we deal with hybrid warfare? I'm telling you some things here जिनका आप example use करके generally भी hybrid warfare में लिख सकते हो और चाइना के केस में तो लिख ही सकते हो, right? So what are they doing? Firstly, what can we do to counter this? Firstly, we can increase our diplomatic engagement. जैसे कि हमने क्वाड बनाया और our engagement with the ASEAN. Then economic diversification is important. आपने सुना होगा ये word, हम इकोनॉमी में देखेंगे भी, China +1, going beyond traditional partners. For example, our idea of Blue Dot Network or Build Back Better World, which is a alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese. Then we need to go for military modernization. जैसे कि हमने joint cyber warfare doctrine के बारे में पढ़ा है in cyber security, right? Then we need to leverage partners who have technology and who can give us this technology. For example, the idea of ICET, the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology with the United States. We need to focus on maritime security with the Chinese. जैसे हमने naval modernization और blue water navy बनाने का हमने decision लिया है, where we will modernize our navy and focus on becoming the net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Then regional connectivity and ensuring connectivity with South Asian partners. For example, India making the Indo-Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway or the Kaladan multimodal project. And then, of course, expanding our soft power. Right. Up. What are the threats that we face? Right. अगर चाइना के थ्रेट के अलावा भी हम देखें, there is also a threat of proxy warfare from Pakistan. There is a threat of cyber attacks. मैंने आपको बताया there was a DDoS attack after Operation Sindoor on Indian government websites. And there are also internal threats such as left-wing extremism and northeast insurgency. और चाइना का threat तो है ही, right? And what are the measures we have taken? So we are making advanced weapons. For example, Durga 2 is a directed energy weapon. It is a laser weapon that the DRDO has made. We have done certain reforms in defense, such as the Chief of Defense Staff or the Defense AI Council. We've had international agreements, such as our foundational agreements with the US, right? So, जिसोमिया लेमोआ ये जो foundational agreements हम करते हैं, we've had these all 4 foundation agreements with the US for sharing of information. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense has been discussing hybrid warfare a lot, and this is the recent context also, and this is why this topic is important. We've also created a defense cyber agency, and we've also had a fact check unit made in the Press Information Bureau for countering misinformation. अब देखो, अब हमारे पास काफी पॉइंट्स हैं. If there is a question that is coming on hybrid warfare or gray zone warfare, gray zone is a zone. Hybrid warfare is a type of warfare. It is in this zone that hybrid warfare happens. तो इन पॉइंट्स को, जैसे डाइम डोमेन्स, ये वाला पॉइंट आप हाइब्रिड वॉरफेयर में भी लिख सकते हो. तो आई डिड नॉट वांट टू रिपीट दीज पॉइंट्स, जस्ट कीप दीज पॉइंट्स इन माइंड. अब वहां जैसा क्वेश्चन आता है उस हिसाब से वी नीड टू कंस्ट्रक्ट, बट वी डू हैव इनफ इंफॉर्मेशन टू राइट इन बोथ ऑफ दीज. All right. Now there are two acts this time that are in the news, and those two acts must be done comprehensively. So two acts that we have to study now. This is broadly under the topic of security forces and their mandate. One of them is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, because its extension in Manipur, and the second one is the National Investigation Agency Act, because of a recent Supreme Court ruling, and we'll see the ruling as well as the analysis of the NIA Act. Now both of these have been asked as previous year questions, so again something that we need to see in detail. Let's come to this first. Let's look at the AFSPA first. तो पहले हम समझते हैं यार, देखो the logic of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, right? This is, if historically we look at it, firstly there was an Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance that came in 1942 after the Quit India movement, and कहीं भी अगर AFSPA लगना होता है तो उससे पहले there has to be a Disturbed Areas Act. Now the question that was asked on the AFSPA in 2015 was about the controversial sections of the act, क्या human rights issues हैं, etc. So what we'll do is we'll look at the sections of the act, and we'll also look at what criticisms have been there, or what is our analysis of the act, and what way forward has to be suggested. तो पहले इस चीज को समझते हैं. देखो, पहले तो इस बात को समझो that no armed force in the world is trained to fight in a civilian environment. ये एक्ट आया कहाँ से, right? Armed forces are supposed to fight uniformed battles. जैसे normally अगर Indian Army है, Indian Army is supposed to fight technically beyond the border. So it's supposed to fight the Pakistani Army or the Chinese Army in a uniformed conflict. चाहे यहाँ पर Indian Army खड़ी है, सामने let's say पाकिस्तानी या Chinese Army खड़ी है, and they are fighting a uniformed battle. But हमारी कंट्री के इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी चैलेंजेस की वजह से हो क्या रहा है, that we have to deploy it in civilian areas where there is possibility of collateral damage, where there is possibility of civilian informers, where unimaginable restraint has to be shown. जैसे stone pelting हो रही है but the army is not allowed to respond, right? अब इन conditions में अगर आर्मी को ऑपरेट करना है, and armed forces who are technically not trained for this, if they have to operate in this condition because of an internal security threat of this gravity, they need to be given special protections, right? Now this is without question that special protection is required. Now the question here becomes that what should be the nature of this special protection, and to what extent should this special protection be given. तो जब भी कहीं पे AFSPA लगाया जाता है, सबसे पहले there is something called a Disturbed Areas Act. पहले ये चीज फोर्स में आती है. Disturbed Areas Act is put in force, then the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is put in force, and then the armed forces are deployed there and given certain special protections. So इस act की, this is one of the shortest acts in the legal system of India, right? It is only a 6-section act. इसमें बस 6 ही sections हैं. So let's first understand what are those sections of this act, right? Section 1 is about short title and commencement, again not very controversial, right? Second, it gives definitions, ये भी कुछ ज़्यादा controversial नहीं है. The third one is a controversial provision. Powers to declare areas to be disturbed areas. Now, governor of a state or central government can declare areas as disturbed, and once an area is declared as disturbed, then the Armed Forces Special Powers Act comes into force. Now, here is the first challenge of this act, because this creates a certain federalism challenge. Now, the governor, although is not meant to be an agent of center, but is definitely influenced by the center, and the central government itself can declare an area as disturbed even if the state government might not agree. तो ये जो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को यहाँ पर ओवरराइडिंग पावर्स मिली हैं, दिस क्रिएट्स एन इशू ऑफ फेडरलिज्म and how this act gets to be applied and removed. The second thing is special powers of the armed forces. Now, look at this. Lethal force in contravention of, if somebody is acting in contravention of laws or orders in these disturbed areas, मान लो यहाँ पर कोई order है कि there will be no assembly of more than 5 people. If somebody acts in contravention to this, they can use legal force. It permits the arrest without warrant, right? It grants powers to search premises without a warrant, right? Now, although it says that the arrested persons, if army arrests someone under AFSPA, they have to be handed over to the nearest police station with the least possible delay, sometimes these measures are not fulfilled. And lastly, it gives legal immunity to the armed personnel for actions taken under the Act. And if you have to prosecute someone who has, let's say, done something wrong in an area where AFSPA was implied, let's say AFSPA has been, put in a particular area, and in this area, once ASPA has been put, some army personnel does some human rights violation, it requires prior sanction of the central government. Without this sanction, even prosecution is not possible. Now, this creates certain challenges as far as the act is concerned. So, एक short act है, हमने एक broadly features देख लिए. The power to declare disturbed areas, the idea of, who can act with lethal force, arresting without warrant, searching without warrant, as well as the requirement of sanction of the central government for any prosecution, as well as legal immunity. These create controversies. And this was the exact question asked, that what are the provisions that are generally opposed by human rights activists? So, ये वाले वो provisions हैं. Now, of course, as you can imagine, this act has gone to the Supreme Court multiple times. So, there was the Inderjeet Barua case, where the Supreme Court said that governor has the power to declare an area as disturbed area, but this power must not be arbitrary. Second, there is the Naga People's Movement of Human Rights Act. It says that Naga People's Movement of Human Rights case, this movement went to the Supreme Court against the ASPA, and there the Supreme Court gave this argument that periodic review of disturbed areas is very important. Lastly, there is the Horendi Gogoi case. In this case, the Supreme Court reiterated Section 5 of the Act and said that if there is someone who has been arrested, you need to hand them back to the police without delay, or with the least possible delay. But in the Naga People's Movement case, the Supreme Court has said that the Act is constitutional. So the constitutionality has been upheld in the apex court. What is the analysis of the Act? Right? देखो, जो मैंने आपको कहा था, if armed forces are being deployed in civilian areas, you have to give them special protection, because no armed force is trained to be in an area where there are civilian informants and there is possibility of collateral damage, right? It has been upheld by the Supreme Court, and we are also seeing now development-oriented security forces in India. For example, Operation Sabdadna, civic action programs, and various other things we have seen in the first lecture. So this is the analysis of the Act, that yes, the Act is required. But what are the issues? Firstly, there are federal issues. The powers of the central government and the power of the governor in declaring an area as disturbed area. And then also with regards to removal of the Act, it is ultimately the central government that takes the decision of removal of the Act. Second, and this might be a new dimension for a lot of you, कि financial issues हैं Act में. What are the financial issues? अगर let's say एक state में ASPA लग जाता है, if ASPA is applied to a state, generally the state government is reluctant to remove it. Why? अगर एक state में ASPA लग गया, now the central government does all the expenditure that is required for the security of that state, right? Because central government gets the responsibility because army is being deployed, armed forces are being deployed, and the budget then comes from the central government. Now let's say in this state ASPA is in operation and the central government is making all the payments for the security of the state. When ASPA will get removed, who will the responsibility fall to? The responsibility then falls to the state government. Now, is the state government capable enough? Are the police forces modernized enough? And lastly, will the state government want to spend this much money from its budget on that area? This becomes the problem. Since the states see that अगर ASPA लगा हुआ है तो ठीक है यार, बाहर की सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने खर्चे कर दिए, बट अगर ASPA हटेगा तो हमें खर्चा करना पड़ेगा सिक्योरिटी पे. So sometimes even the states are reluctant to remove the ASPA. Then rarely a review of disturbed areas happens. कि ये आपने सेक्शन 3 में डिक्लेयर तो कर दिया एरियाज को डिस्टर्ब्ड एरिया, बट who will review this, right? And a periodic review does not happen. This is a problem. Then there have been claims or allegations of human rights issues. अब देखो मैंने क्या बोला, claims and allegations. जब आपने पेपर में भी लिखना है, always write claims and allegations, because I don't think or any of us would believe that the armed forces they do human rights violations purposefully. It might happen in their line of duty, it might be a necessary thing for internal security, but I don't think any person of the Indian armed forces would like to engage in human rights violations against our own citizens. But the human rights cell of the army has been criticized for its manner of investigations. Then तो ये आप लिख सकते हो. Then military courts versus civilian courts. Now this becomes a problem. Once you are, even if someone is acting in an area of AFSPA and you get sanctioned to prosecute them, you will have to go to a military court. तो ये जो 2010 का एक Machel encounter था, what happened here was that the military court first convicted some army officers of human rights violations, but later that conviction was overturned and there was no civilian oversight in this case. That becomes a problem. And of course, the provision of legal immunity from investigation does garner some sort of criticism. Now, what is the way forward? In the way forward, please mention the work of the Justice Hegde Commission, who has said that there is a need to review of the disturbed areas in the act. Right? जब आप किसी area को disturbed areas बोलते हो, there should be a periodic review. If there is constant imposition of the ASPA in one place, this is mockery of law. Why? देखो यार, we are a democracy. It has been more than 75 years of independence. How can an area in the world's largest democracy be a constantly disturbed area? Right? So there needs to be periodic review, and that is what the Justice Hegde Commission said. Now, recent context why it was in the news: the jurisdiction has decreased by 70% in the northeast. तो बहुत जगहों से हमने नॉर्थ ईस्ट में AFSPA हटा दी है, as said by the Honorable Home Minister. And this diagram will show you the current extent of the law. So in 4 districts in Assam, in 4 districts in Arunachal Pradesh, there was re-imposition in some districts in Manipur because of the recent crisis, and 8 districts in Nagaland. This is where the act is in the northeast. Of course, act continues to be in force in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So अगर ASPA पे अब हमें question आए, we know the sections of the act, we know what the Supreme Court has said, we know what are the issues here, and we also know the analysis, so should not be a problem. Way forward लिखना हो तो हम Justice Hegde Commission के बारे में लिख सकते हैं. Now, the other act that we have to read about, the other body we have to read about, is the National Investigative Agency. Now, why was it in the news? There was the Ankush Vipan Kapoor case in the Supreme Court. अब इस केस में हुआ क्या था? This particular individual was being investigated by the NIA under the National Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. अब NDPS Act की प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि NIA के शेड्यूल में this act is not there. So how does the NIA work? We'll just understand. तो NIA के शेड्यूल में NIA Act के शेड्यूल में there are certain offenses and there are certain acts that are placed in the schedule of the NIA Act, right? तो NIA Act है, इसका एक शेड्यूल है, इसमें हमने कुछ एक्ट्स प्लेस करी हैं, जैसे अनलॉफुल एक्टिविटीज प्रिवेंशन एक्ट. तो NIA की जो मैंडेट है, that mandate is such that NIA can only investigate cases on those acts which are mentioned in its schedule. जैसे prevention of hijacking act is in the schedule of NIA Act. तो जो नेशनल इन्वेस्टिगेटिव एजेंसी है वो प्रिवेंशन ऑफ हाईजैकिंग वाले केसेस तो इन्वेस्टिगेट कर सकती है, बट लेट्स से द डिजिटल पर्सनल डेटा प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट इज नॉट इन द NIA शेड्यूल. तो अगर DPDP का कोई केस है तो वो NIA इन्वेस्टिगेट नहीं कर सकती है. अब सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये बात क्या गई कि NIA वाज इन्वेस्टिगेटिंग अ केस अंडर नेशनल ड्रग्स एंड साइकोट्रोपिक सब्सटेंसेस एक्ट. नाउ दिस एक्ट इज नॉट इन द शेड्यूल ऑफ द NIA. So this person went to the Supreme Court saying that NIA's investigation of this person is unconstitutional. But the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the NIA, and they said that their powers are not restricted to schedule offenses. To tell you a little bit about this ruling, there is Section 8 of the NIA Act. Section 8 में क्या लिखा है? Section 8 says that the NIA has the power, the National Investigative Agency has the power to investigate any crime that is either mentioned in the schedule or crimes under acts mentioned in the schedule or crimes connected to them. अब सारी कंटेंशन यहाँ पे थी कि कनेक्टेड वर्ड को कैसे इंटरप्रेट करना है, एंड सुप्रीम कोर्ट टुक अ वाइड इंटरप्रिटेशन इन दिस केस एंड सेड दैट इवन इफ देयर इज अ केस वेयर देयर इज अ कनेक्टेड ऑफेंस, right, NDPS Act can be connected to various other acts. If there is a connected offense, NIA can investigate, and that is why it was in the news. So it might be asked to you in GS2 also. So even in GS2 for this year, National Investigative Agency and this Ankush Vipan Kapoor case becomes fairly important. Now, first let's understand why was the NIA made. Now, I've not written this in the notes because this is a fairly complex topic to understand, and I think logic आप लोगों को समझ आना चाहिए. This is actually coming, this analysis that I'm actually telling you is coming from NR Vasan sir, with whom I've done a podcast on my YouTube channel. And he was the first person to be, or I think first or the second person to be one of the directors of the NIA. And he has held very high positions in the NIA, and he's a very decorated IPS officer, now retired. He's from the Andhra Pradesh cadre. So I'm telling you exactly what he told me. He said this: firstly, there was the CBI. The CBI's main job was to look at corruption. Okay. Now, if you might have read about the CBI, or आप GS2 में पढ़ोगे भी, that there is an idea of general consent given by state governments versus specific consent for cases that is given by state government. So if the CBI wants to investigate a case in a particular state, the state government has to give consent to the CBI. Now, sometimes due to political reasons, these state governments were not giving consent to the CBI. ठीक है, तो CBI states में जाके investigate नहीं कर पा रही थी. The other job was that CBI's main task was to look at corruption. Now, when the cases of terror started rising, these two problems were seen. That one, CBI was being asked to investigate these cases of terror, but CBI's expertise lay in corruption. And secondly, this idea of consent given by the state governments became a major challenge, because in terror cases you cannot wait for a state government to give you consent. You need a larger agency that could deal with these issues. In this context, after the unfortunate incident of 26/11 in Mumbai, there was a decision to draft the NIA Act, and the new body called the National Investigative Agency is born. Now, the difference mainly between the CBI and the NIA is that NIA does not need any sort of consent from the states. It does not need consent from the states to investigate any crime. And the NIA is specifically focusing on cases of terrorism, smuggling, terrorism, money laundering, financing of terrorism, etc. So this also becomes something which the NIA then specializes in. It also reduces the burden of the CBI, and CBI can also focus on its core job, which is investigating corruption cases. Now, this is the logic of why the NIA was made. Now, how is the NIA Act structured? The NIA Act, National Investigative Agency Act, has a schedule. In this schedule, various other acts are mentioned. I'll just show you which are mentioned. Under these acts, if there is any crime committed, NIA gets the ability to investigate this crime, and the reporting of the NIA, of course, happens to the central government. The state governments, let's say because policing is a state subject, remember this is also a federalism issue. The state government must report any such scheduled offense. Schedule है NIA Act का, उसके अंदर कुछ acts हैं. उस एक्ट के अंदर अगर कोई क्राइम होता है किसी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट में, इट इज देयर जॉब टू रिपोर्ट दिस टू द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, एंड देन द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट टेक्स द कॉल वेदर द NIA शुड बी सेंट टू इन्वेस्टिगेट दिस केस और नॉट. ठीक है, लॉजिक समझ आया? So what is the role of the NIA? The role of the NIA here is a terror related investigation. This is their primary role. If you look at the act of the NIA, this exact line is written there, that for any offenses against India's sovereignty, security, integrity, friendly relations with foreign countries, if any of these things are being threatened, then the NIA gets to investigate. Now, in the schedule of the NIA Act, there are a certain set of laws like the Explosive Substances Act, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the Anti-Hijacking Act, the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act, Safety of Civil Aviation Act, and the Atomic Energy Act. There are various others, but सारे तो हम याद नहीं कर पाएंगे, तो ये 6 याद कर लेते हैं. ये याद करनी है क्यों? Because our syllabus topic is security forces and their mandate. So mandate of NIA becomes very important. Now, Section 8 of the NIA Act says that NIA can also investigate offenses linked to schedule offenses. इसी चीज को लेके हम सुप्रीम कोर्ट में गए, और ये जो अंकुश विपिन कपूर केस हुआ है, here Supreme Court has interpreted this in a broad manner, saying that NIA can investigate in a broad case even if there is a non-scheduled offense which is connected to a scheduled offense. Okay. Now, what is the jurisdiction of the NIA? For all the entire territory of India, so even to state governments, the NIA has jurisdiction. It can investigate government servants. It can also investigate beyond Indian borders, and it can investigate on ships and aircrafts of India, even when they are in international spaces. Because again, if you have to have a body that has been given power under the Anti-Hijacking Act, you have to give it this jurisdiction. Now, what are the powers of the NIA? if directed by center, it mainly has powers of investigation. It also has powers of prosecution, and there are special courts set up under the NIA Act where it can do such prosecution. It coordinates with state governments, and it also has extraterritorial powers, that is, powers beyond the territory of India. Right now, the NIA Act was amended in 2019, and on this exact amendment, the UPSC has asked a previous year question. So again, it will not be repeated, but we need to know about the act. So the act was amended to first allow for additional offenses. So offenses of human trafficking, offenses of cyber terrorism were added into the jurisdiction of the NIA Act. The jurisdiction was also expanded outside India, and it was said that a special court will be made in New Delhi for any offenses that are done overseas, so that the investigation and prosecution can be expedited. It also allowed the central government to take over cases that were left with the state police and give them to the NIA if the central government feels that, let's say, central government को लगता है कि यार ये बहुत ही serious case है और ये NIA को देना जरूरी है, then the central government can do so. Now, what are the successes that the NIA has achieved? Right. Firstly, there is the National Terror Data Fusion and Analysis Center. This has been made to help the NIA. Then it is made the nodal agency for countering terror funding in India. ये आप terror financing वाले topic में भी हम लिख सकते हैं. There is a NFSU Memorandum of Understanding. NFSU stands for the National Forensic Science University, so that these two bodies can gain intelligence from each other, and from forensic sciences knowledge, NIA can even investigate better. Now, this is why also NIA was in the news. It has achieved a 95% conviction rate in its lifetime and a 100% conviction rate in 2024. This shows the brilliance of this investigative agency in a country where there have been cases where so many scams have been left unaddressed. Right? For example, in the 2G scam, we are hardly able to convict anyone because of the lack of proper investigation. In the Arushi Talwar case, we're not able to find the killers even today. But the NIA has been a brilliant organization as far as investigation is concerned. So in the last year, they've arrested about 11 ISIS operatives. They've arrested 28 people in left-wing extremism cases and 18 people in the Northeast insurgency cases, especially with regards to the ULFA. Now, ULFA में आपको याद होगा, there is a Paresh Barua faction that continues to operate. इसके काफी लोगों को NIA ने last year arrest किया है और prosecute किया है, and they have achieved a 100% conviction rate. So brilliance in investigation. तो इस पे question आ सकता है, तो we have enough fodder points. Now, the problems of the NIA. Firstly, there are problems of federalism, and states are wary of cooperation because the entire gamut of responsibility is then placed on the center, and center gets all the problems. So there is all the powers. So there is a federalism problem in this case, and the way forward to this could be joint investigations. Then there are obviously issues with regards to coordination of the NIA with other agencies. So for this, what we can do, the way forward can be information and intelligence sharing between these agencies. Now, Section 6 of the Act says that state governments, let's say कोई state है हरियाणा में कोई ऐसा offense होता है that is under the NIA scheduled offenses. So Haryana government must report in 15 days to the state government that ऐसा कोई event हुआ है, and you must give this to the NIA. 15 days is too much of a time in serious crime. So this causes delay. And then the role of the political executive in picking cases that the NIA will investigate without judicial oversight creates a problem of political interference, right? But again, you can write the way forward to this. कहीं भी आपको exam में way forward लिखना है, just counter the challenges and it's done. The other thing we have to read, and this is fairly important for this year, but no previous year question on these lines has been asked so far. Now let's see what happens in the future. The Ministry of Defense is saying that 2025 is their year of reforms, right? And we will have multiple reforms in 2025. अब इस चीज को समझने के लिए there are various connected topics that we have to read. But to understand what are the connected topics, I will refer you to this. Now, this is an exact statement of the Honorable Raksha Mantri, who is our Honorable Defense Minister. He has given this exact statement, and I've picked this article up from PIB. And let's see what he has said about defense reforms. So firstly, he has said that there needs to be a bolstering of jointness and integration and the establishment of integrated theater command. So this is one topic that we have to read. Then he says that new domains such as cyber and space and emerging technologies such as AI, machine learning, hypersonics, and tactics and procedures must be developed. So second topic हमने cyber तो देख ही लिया. Then second topic is artificial intelligence. So this becomes another topic that I have to read, AI in defense. Then shared understanding of operational requirements and joint operational capabilities through inter-service cooperation and training. अब ये जो इंटर सर्विस कोऑपरेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग की बात है, this tells me that the inter services organization bill is something that becomes important. Then he says acquisition procedures to be made simpler and time sensitive to have robust capability development. So defense acquisition procedure becomes the fourth topic that I have to read. Then technology transfer and knowledge sharing between defense sector and civil industries, promoting public private partnerships. So again, this becomes another topic, public private partnership in defense. Collaboration across various stakeholders, breaking silos, civil military coordination. Now for civil military coordination, there are two things that we have to read. One is the formation of the Chief of Defense Staff, and the other one is the Agnipath scheme. Right. Then position India as a credible exporter of defense products. So defense exports becomes a topic that I have to read. Ensure the welfare of veterans by leveraging their expertise. And lastly, sense of pride in Indian culture and ideas. So now if I look at it, the topic of defense reforms, या तो हमें एक broad question आ सकता है defense reforms पे. If we get a broad question on defense reforms, please mug this statement up, right? Because you cannot write a better answer than what the Honorable Raksha Mantri has said, right? And if there is a specific question, we'll read it enough that we can write a 10 marker on each of these topics, right? आएगा भी वैसे question तो broadly ही आएगा, right? So what are the things under defense reforms that we have to see? Let's just recall them. One, we have to read about defense exports. So we'll see this in detail, what the government has done for defense exports. We have to read about the Agnipath scheme for civil military relations. We have to read about the formation of the Chief of Defense Staff. We have to read about the idea of the integrated theater commands. We have to read about, with the CDS or integrated theater commands, we can also read about the inter-services organization bill. It's not been passed yet, still at a bill stage, so we'll see it in broad contours, but ITC becomes fairly important. We have to see the role of new technology in defense. So we'll read about AI in defense and drones in defense specifically. This is something that we have to see. Then we have to read about the sixth topic, which they've said is about, I think the one that we missed was procurement in defense. So we have to read about procurement in the defense sector. And lastly, the seventh idea is about public-private partnerships in defense, right? So अगर defense reforms पे question आया, please mention all of these things. Let mention this entire gamut. अब ये भी हो सकता है कि अगर वो किसी एक चीज पे क्वेश्चन पूछें तो they'll ask a specific question on any of these 7 topics. So now we are going to read all of these 7 topics and we'll read them in detail, right? Enough so that we can write a 10 marker on each of these. So इस बारे में बात करते हैं. All right. So let's first start with defense exports. Now, the Honorable Prime Minister has said that from being the largest importer, India must become a reliable exporter for its friends. And as we'll see in the data, there has been a huge rise in defense exports as well. Now, why has there been this rise in defense exports? There has been a policy focus of this government, so a lot of reforms have been done in the defense sector, as we'll see. Now, there is a direct focus on reduction in imports, and this is being done through two things. One, we are focusing on defense public sector undertakings with policies like Make in India. Now, Make in India has its major focus on the defense sector. Then there is the defense indigenization policy, right? So what we are trying to do now, that in any ministry, for example, the defense ministry has a revenue budget and a capital budget. We are saying that whatever the capital budget of the defense ministry is, 75% of this would be spent on procurements from Indian companies. We've also focused on innovations such as the innovations for defense excellence project, and we'll see this in detail. And we've also seen the defense diplomacy that the Ministry of External Affairs has done. What have they done? That they've basically promoted Indian defense products abroad. And we've also had a line of credit based approach. What does this mean? Let's say there is a small country like Seychelles, and Seychelles wants to buy certain products from India, and they're going to cost $50 million. Now, Seychelles might not have $50 million to spend in one go. So India will give a line of credit to Seychelles of $50 million and then ask Seychelles to pay us back. तो पहले हम Seychelles को लोन देंगे 50 मिलियन का, उसी 50 मिलियन को यूज करके Seychelles हमारे से डिफेंस इक्विपमेंट खरीदेगा. But since it is a loan, eventually Seychelles will repay it. So we'll get the money back with interest, but we become a reliable and globally acclaimed export power. That matters. अब हमने करा क्या है? These initiatives are important, and I think if they ask you, they will ask you something around this only. So firstly, we have created positive indigenization lists. इसका क्या मतलब है? Positive indigenization list means that let's say there is any particular equipment. Let's say there are bullets for the INSAS rifle. We say that this is now in the positive indigenization list. That means they can only be procured from India. राइट, तो ऐसी हमने लिस्ट बनाई है और स्पेसिफिकली वी हैव पुट इक्विपमेंट्स इन द पॉजिटिव इंडिजनाइजेशन लिस्ट कि ये इंडियन मैन्युफैक्चरर से ही प्रोक्योर होगी. नाउ डिफेंस इंडस्ट्री रिक्वायर्स लाइसेंसिंग, राइट, बिकॉज इट्स अ सेंसिटिव सिक्योरिटी रिलेटेड इंडस्ट्री. सो वी हैव सिंप्लीफाइड लाइसेंसिंग. 2 defense industrial corridors, one in UP and one in Tamil Nadu, have been made. We've established a technology development fund where we are funding defense technologies. We've also made a Shrijan portal. इस portal पे हम बताते हैं कि कौन कौन सी वो चीजें हैं where we are going to indigenize. We have set up the mission DevSpace, which is for innovations in the space sector. We've encouraged foreign direct investment in defense. So 74% FDI is now allowed under the automatic route without approval to the defense sector. We've simplified the defense acquisition procedure, and we'll see this. And we'll also see in detail the innovations for defense excellence. But if we get a question on defense exports directly, please write these initiatives. Now, what are the challenges with regards to defense exports? Dekho, if you look at defense, it is actually a very distorted market. It's a monopsony. Monopsony means it's a buyer's market. राइट, लेट्स से देयर इज अ डिफेंस पीएसयू एंड ये डिफेंस पीएसयू बहुत ज्यादा पैसे स्पेंड करती है ऑन रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट एंड दे कम अप विद अ न्यू टाइप ऑफ राइफल. ठीक है, इन्होंने एक नई टाइप की राइफल बनाई. व्हाट इफ वंस दे हैव मैन्युफैक्चर्ड इट द बायर सेज नो दिस इज नॉट एज पर माय रिक्वायरमेंट्स, राइट, ये हमें अच्छी नहीं लग रही है, या दिस डज नॉट हैव अ requisite fire rate or does not have stability or is too expensive, that R&D goes waste. So the market is distorted and a lot of your R&D costs are very high, but these costs will actually go waste if not procured later. Then अब ये डिफेंस PSUs की ये प्रॉब्लम है कि देखो, इमेजिन करो यू आर इन अ डिफेंस PSU एंड यू आर हेडिंग इट. व्हाट डू यू डू? अगर आप बहुत ज्यादा इन्वेंट्री क्रिएट करके रख लो, आपने राइफल्स बना दी थी, जैसे आपने 1 मिलियन राइफल्स बना के रख ली, तो आपको बहुत ज्यादा कॉस्ट आएगी. बाद में हो सकता है लोग कहें कि नहीं, हमारी टेक्निकल स्पेसिफिकेशंस मीट नहीं हो रही हैं इन राइफल से. दिस क्रिएट्स अ प्रॉब्लम फॉर यू. अगर आप बहुत ज्यादा इन्वेंट्री नहीं बनाओ और आपको एकदम से ऑर्डर मिल गया 1 लाख राइफल्स का, तो ऐसा तो है नहीं कि आप एक दिन में वो डिलीवर कर दोगे. सो इट विल देन क्रिएट अ डिले, राइट. And usually in this case, there are supply monopolies. If one company is making one particular product, only that company makes that particular product. So this becomes a major problem. Up. The other thing is there are a lot of players here. एक armed forces है, Ministry of Defense भी है, डिफेंस पब्लिक सेक्टर अंडरटेकिंग है, कुछ प्राइवेट प्लेयर्स हैं. तो कोई सिंगल पॉइंट एजेंसी नहीं बनी है फॉर एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कम्युनिकेशन, एंड दैट लीड्स टू एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव मिसकम्युनिकेशन इन द सेक्टर. अगर हम ये सेम चीज प्राइवेट सेक्टर को हम स्पेस में इन्वॉल्व करने को देखें, तो वी हैव न्यू स्पेस इंडिया लिमिटेड, वी हैव इन स्पेस, राइट. हमने ये ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस बनाई हैं फॉर दिस पर्टिकुलर पर्पस, बट हियर इट इज नॉट देयर. Now, although this has been corrected majorly, especially by this government, but पहले ये problem रहती थी that there is ad hoc institutional policy focus and there is not a proper, set procedure. And DPSUs, because they are government companies, they tend to crowd out the private sector. This becomes problems in defense exports. Of course, ये policy level problems हैं. इसके अलावा जो बाकी export की कोई भी problems होती हैं, मैं आपको economy में बताऊंगा ही, that there are obviously challenges from the rest of the world. Our equipment has not been tested. We are not technologically as superior in armed equipment as far as the US is. For example, we do not have a 5th generation fighter, right? We are trying to buy the F-35 from the US. We don't have a 5th generation fighter of our own, right? तो हम अभी उस लेवल पे पहुंचे ही नहीं है, and it takes time for any nascent defense industry to reach that stage. However, there has been encouragement and we'll see that. तो अब अगर आपसे कोई पॉलिसी रिकमेंडेशन या वे फॉरवर्ड पूछे, तो देयर इज द डिफेंस प्रोडक्शन एंड एक्सपोर्ट प्रमोशन पॉलिसी ऑफ 2020. राइट. इसका जो ड्राफ्ट है उसमें ये कुछ रिकमेंडेशंस दी हुई हैं, हम इनको लिख सकते हैं एज वे फॉरवर्ड. फर्स्टली इट सेज दैट वी नीड अ होल ऑफ गवर्नमेंट अप्रोच. द मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ डिफेंस, the Ministry of External Affairs, the Foreign Cooperation Directorate of the Armed Forces, they all need to work together. Then अभी एक Defense Export Promotion Cell है in the Ministry of Defense. They say you need to give it an agency status and give it more mandate. Then it says that we need to focus on high value platforms जैसे कि Tejas and BrahMos. We should not merely be importing or exporting bullets. Then we have a closed defense ecosystem. What does this mean? देखो, across the world, if you look at, let's say, how Apple is making its iPhone, दे आर हैविंग अ सप्लाई चेन इंटीग्रेशन. बने डिजाइन कैलिफोर्निया में होगा, मैन्युफैक्चर लेट्स से चाइना में होगा, ट्रांसपोर्ट वियतनाम में होगा, वहां पे थोड़ी असेंबली होगी, फिर फाइनल असेंबली इंडिया में होगी. So there are global supply chains that are interconnected. In the defense world, because there is secrecy involved, of course, there has to be some role of a closed defense ecosystem. But we then miss out on technological developments from the rest of the world. So at least with countries who we consider our allies, we can have joint supply chains in this regard. Then there is the role of the defense attaches. What are defense attaches? They are people from the armed forces who are sent as attaches to various embassies. So their role in promoting our defense equipment. Then you need to give revenue targets for the DPSUs and Ordnance Factory Board. You need to say that 25% of what you are manufacturing or 25% of your revenue must come from exports. Then we need industry, academia and association collaborations. And जो हमने products बनाए हैं उनको show off भी तो करना है world को, तभी लोगों को पता चलेगा they are that good, because wars are infrequent, right? अब wars are not that frequent, but Defense Expo shows happen a lot. So Defense Expo and Aero India shows for promotion. जैसे अभी भी अगर आप देखोगे after Operation Sindoor, although I mean from what I've read in the papers, we have used the S400 a lot, but the government has not talked about S400 in detail. Government has only talked about indigenous systems because this is our method of showing off to the world how capable our equipment is. Then again, defense industry is focused on clearances and licenses. So we need to make this clearance and license process even simpler, and we need to reduce the regulatory cholesterol in this regard. Some data, if you get a question on this, that there has been a 34-fold rise in India's defense exports since 2019, and we are trying to reach the target of 50,000 crore of exports by 2029. We are exporting now to 100 plus countries, and US, France and Armenia are the top countries of export, and we have a diverse portfolio. So we are exporting bulletproof jackets, the Dornier 228, the Chetak helicopter, and made in Bihar boots. We have exported army boots to Russia. Now, defense public sector undertakings have taken a lot of this increase in the exports, but still their share is 35% and the private sector has 64% share. Now, अगर आपको ये question आ जाए तो आपको कुछ examples चाहिए होंगे, right? So these are some country-wise examples to write in your answers. For example, to the Seychelles we have given the fast patrol vehicles. To Armenia we have given the Pinaka rocket and the Swati battlefield radar. To Philippines we've exported the BrahMos and the Akash surface to air missile. To Myanmar, we've exported the INS Sindhuvir, and to Maldives, we've given the Dornier 228 aircraft. Now, some keywords here. The idea is we make for the world, right? We have a line of credit diplomacy, market diversification strategy, and we need to look at every defense equipment in its strategic value, but also in its commercial value. हम कुछ manufacture करते हैं, maybe India के लिए वो उतना important ना हो, but it might have a lot of commercial value for the world, right? Now, again, if you get a question on defense modernization, right? अभी हमने defense reforms देखे. Defense modernization is similar, but ये term से आप confused ना हो. Defense modernization would have the following meanings. A, you modernize the armed forces. You explore new domains such as cyber war, such as space war, such as gray zone warfare. You develop your capabilities in hybrid warfare. You change your defense acquisition procedure and simplify it. ये procedure हम देखेंगे. And we need higher order defense reforms. What are higher order defense reforms? जो एक broad level पे they will have an impact on our defense ecosystem. So the formation of integrated theater commands, the formation of the chief of defense staff, the formation of the national security doctrine जो हमने first lecture में देखा था, the formation of the Department of Military Affairs, and even reforms in recruitment such as the Agniveer scheme. Speaking of the Agniveer scheme, now let us talk about this scheme. कि इस scheme का क्या rationale था, इस स्कीम से एक्चुअली इसके फीचर्स क्या हैं. इफ द क्वेश्चन कम्स, द क्वेश्चन विल कम ऑन द एनालिसिस ऑफ द स्कीम, एंड फॉर द एनालिसिस ऑफ द स्कीम आई एम रिलाइंग कंप्लीटली ऑन एन आर्टिकल that was written by Lieutenant General Raj Shukla sir. As I'm sure all of you are aware, sir is a member of the Union Public Service Commission. Sir is also the person who took my interview and gave me 195 marks in the interview. So I'm always, throughout my life, I'll be very, very grateful to him. Probably the reason why I got selected. Now, in this particular topic, we'll look at what he has said about the Agniveer scheme, what are the criticisms, and how we need to take it forward. So, what was the rationale for introducing the Agnipath scheme? The first rationale was that we wanted financial efficiency in the defense sector. See, of the defense ministry budget, most of the budget was being spent on revenue account on pensions, right? So we wanted that we need to spend more on capital expenditure and have budget reallocation so that we can spend on new technologies, on procurement, etc., etc. So this was the first logic, that we need to reduce the pension bill of the government. Secondly, we wanted a young army, right? Our current average age of the army is 32 years, which is too high. We want a young army that A, can perform better. And this was the IPKF experience, the Indian Peacekeeping Force experience also, that young soldiers were performing better. And secondly, young soldiers would be more skilled and more adept at technological advances. Right, so young army would be more tech savvy, and with the new domains of warfare like gray zone warfare and hybrid warfare emerging, we need a tech savvy army. Then it would create a set of disciplined youth, and there are global examples such as USA and Israel where there are similar parallels. Now, what are the features of the scheme? There will be pan-India recruitment, and there will be a 4-year term, and after 6 months of basic training given to everyone. So firstly, you will recruit a set of people, you'll give all of them 6 months of basic training, and you'll keep them in the army for 4 years. Now, after the people have spent these 4 years in the army, 25% of them will be regularized into the Indian Armed Forces, and 75% will be sent back with a Seva Nidhi and a skill certificate. This will be some amount of money for their service, so they can use that money. It's close to 11 lakh rupees, but the figure is not important. You can use this for starting their own business, or for because it's basically a compensation for the time that they spent here. And they will be given a skill certificate from the National Skill Development Corporation, and there'll be other exit pathways, and they can use this for nation building. This is the basic scheme, right? The idea is to create a young, lean, and a tech savvy army. Now, what are the positives of the scheme? Firstly, warfare is becoming more and more complex, and this complexity must reflect in recruitment. The fact that we're going to have technology enabled warfare in the future, human to human combat is going to become almost irrelevant. We do need a set of young people. Secondly, when we have a new training system, now people have criticized the 6-month training also, but Lieutenant General Raj Shukla sir says that a modern metric of training needs to be followed. We are going to have simulations such as augmented reality and virtual reality in training, so training can be made short and effective. Now, a lot of criticism of the scheme has come from the fact that what about those people who will be sent back, the 75%? So here we'd like to point out that the army is not a place for people to get employment. The army is for India's national security. So only the best of the best will be kept in the army. And this was the experience of the Indian Peacekeeping Force also, that it is the young soldiers who actually perform better in warfare. Then there are 2 cylinders of excellence. Now this is the most excellent point that I want you to write. सी मेन क्रिटिसिज्म क्या है अग्निवीर का कि आपने लोगों को रिक्रूट कर लिया, फिर 4 साल बाद उनको निकाल दिया, राइट? तो क्यों आप ये कर रहे हो? यू शुड रिक्रूट डायरेक्टली टू द आर्मी. Now, what Raj Shukla sir says here is that there are 2 cylinders of excellence in India at the moment. There is a civilian domain, which has its own set of excellence in, let's say, management, in technology, in corporate skills, and there is a domain of the military. Now, the military is not just a pool of security guards. Here also people learn skills of leadership, of organization, of jointness, of technology, of discipline. वो कहते हैं कि ये cylinders of excellence of India have been kept separated by an artificial wall of granite, and this must be collapsed, right? जो military skills हैं, they are also applicable in the civilian space. If anyone has actually trained in the military, they will perform better in civilian spheres, and there must be a linkage between these 2 separate skills. And इसी के लिए ये अग्निवीर scheme बहुत अच्छी है for people who will exit. Right, the Agniveers who will exit, they would have gained a set of skills from the military, and these skills would be applicable to the civilian sphere. And as more and more civilians will now want to come to the military because they know it's a 4-year tour of duty, they can also bring their civilian skills to the military. So these artificial walls of granite between the civil sphere and the military sphere will collapse, and national security will be democratized. Right? There will be democratization of national security, and many people with many diverse perspectives will come to the army. So the army will gain from various experiences, and the civilian sphere will gain from the experiences and the skills that are taught in the military. He also says that it will lead to a creation of brand Agniveer, right? देखो इसका एग्जांपल देता हूँ. Let's say you are the SP in a district, right? And there are a lot of Agniveers who have trained in the military for 4 years, and now they are back to their own districts, and you are given the task in your district to recruit some constables. Now you will already know कि यार ये वो लोग हैं जो अग्निवीर थे, जो आर्मी से आए हैं. So you will already know that these people are disciplined. These people have organizational skills and they have served the country before, so they have an India consciousness. So it is much easier and much better for you to recruit these people. So this scheme will create a sort of brand Agniveer, because the military is not just a pool of security guards, it is teaching skills such as leadership, organization, discipline, etc. So what he says is that from a womb to tomb model, that you come once in the army and you stay there forever, of pay, pension, and dependency on the army, we will actually move to the spirit of innovation, energy, and enterprise. Right? So you can use these points in this answer, and of course, वो सारी चीजें तो हैं ही. There are obviously the points of the fact that we'll get disciplined youth, our average age will go down, we'll have a tech savvy army, we'll have a young army, but जो recruits यहाँ से निकलेंगे, the 75% people who exit there, even they will have a lot of benefit, because they can now bring military skills to the civilian space, and there will be a creation of a sort of brand Agniveer. Ye words, collapse of artificial walls of granite between two silos of excellence. ऐसे words please अपने means में लिखना if you want to get more marks. Now, what were the criticisms of this scheme? Firstly, there was no pilot testing. Right? कोई इससे पहले टेस्ट नहीं किया गया. It was directly done. So this remains a problem. Then there was a dilution of the military ethos. Right? What can happen is, criticism यहाँ पर क्या है, that what happens if on one side, people who have to have a loyalty to the army, अगर आपको armed forces में serve करना है, you have to be ready to give up your life for the army. So the criticism was made that people who are willing to give up their life for the armed forces, they do so because there is an assurance that the army will take care of them, the army will take care of their families, etc. And they know that even if some untoward incident happens, they are set for life. Their spouses or their parents, as the case may be, will keep getting pensions. But अगर आपने 4 साल में उन लोगों को निकालना है, वो जो 4 years होंगे उसमें आप उन लोगों को कॉम्बैट रोल्स में भी डालोगे, they might not have that military ethos of service before self. They might not have that military ethos of loyalty and unquestioning loyalty to their seniors and to the country. Right? So this tour of duty might create an army of tourists. Now this is again keywords that you can use. Then there is a challenge of demobilization. Right? The people who get demobilized, the 75%, they will face challenges as far as re-enlistment is considered. Right? CAPF में उनको कुछ quotas तो दिए गए हैं, but these quotas are insufficient. Then in the army you are constantly fighting. Right? You might be in a place where you might have to kill somebody. Now it might create a psychological impact and PTSD later, especially if your PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, especially if you are letting these people go and no ideas have been put for the mental health initiatives for these people. And lastly, there are the features of unemployment. If you have unemployment of people who have been trained in military skills, it is more likely that they would move towards crime. So these are the criticisms of this scheme. Now, what is the way forward? The way forward is that, one, we need to do holistic empowerment of the Agniveers, right? Of course, we have to ensure combat effectiveness of the army. This cannot be criticized on. But जो transition है उन लोगों का who are exiting the army, उसके लिए we need to create inter-ministerial and cross-border collaboration, and a talent pipeline-based approach needs to be followed. That yes, this talent pipeline has come out from the army, but we will use them in a certain place. And ultimately, job creation matters here. Now, we need to create more opportunities for these Agniveers in civil and administrative roles. जो अभी quotas कुछ दिए गए हैं Central Armed Police Forces of about 10%, but this is not sufficient. More quotas need to be created, and a continuous evaluation of the scheme needs to be done. Now, some recent context why this was in the news, because the Department of Military Affairs has sought feedback from 3 services on the Agniveer scheme, and there have been certain anti-Agnipath protests in Bihar. Right? So because of this it was in the news. तो अगर आएगा भी questions will come about the criticism of the scheme, the positives of the scheme. So please write these keywords because they're coming from Raj Shukla sir's article. Of course they'll help you, right? Moving forward. Now let's talk of integrated theater commands. What is the meaning of integrated theater command? पहले ये चीज समझते हैं कि integrated theater command का meaning क्या होता है, and then we'll understand what is the rationale. Let's say this is our border with Pakistan, right? This is India and this is Pakistan and this is our border. This will be described as one theater of war. One theater of war. Ab मान लो we are fighting a war here. There is the army that's going to fight a war on land. There might be deployment of the navy in the Arabian Sea, and as we saw in Operation Sindoor, of course the air force will also fight, right? Let's see we are fighting a limited war. Ab is time pe what is the situation? The condition at this time is that army has its own command. So there are 7 army commands in the country, and the army has its own structure of command and orders and everything. Similarly, there are 7 air force commands in the country. So air force has its own system, and there are 3 naval commands. But when this sort of operation happens, war is no longer happening in these domains. War needs that they need to talk to each other. Let's say the army goes here fighting with the Pakistanis, and they can get certain intelligence that this place needs to be bombed, right? The air force then would need information with regards to कि अच्छा किस टाइप का एयरक्राफ्ट हम भेजें. अगर ये इंफॉर्मेशन एयरक्राफ्ट की मिलेगी एयरफोर्स को, they'll be able to carry out their operations much more effectively. But the army might not have this intelligence. They might not know which air force aircraft might be the best suited here. Then the air force, while bombing, might think that okay, their naval we've tried to attack their ports and seems that their navy is diverted, so navy can send a particular sort of attack here. अब इसके लिए भी jointness चाहिए, but when they have their own commands and they have their own chain of command structure, this might become a problem. तो इसको solve करने के लिए we come up with something called an integrated theater command. जैसे ये एक theater of war है, इस theater of war में तीनों forces, land पे army, एयर में एयरफोर्स और सी में नेवी, इन तीनों को कमांड करने के लिए देयर विल बी वन पर्सन. सो वन पर्सन विल हेड दिस कमांड कंप्लीटली. ही विल बी इन कंट्रोल ऑफ द एयरफोर्स एसेट्स, द आर्मी एसेट्स एज वेल एज द नेवी एसेट्स इन दिस रीजन, एंड ही विल गिव ऑल द कमांड्स, राइट? तो उसको अब पता होगा. सो नाउ ऑल द एसेट्स एंड ऑल द रिसोर्सेज कम इन वन प्लेस. So now war fighting becomes more better. Resources are utilized better. Operations are more disciplined. There is a coordinated response, and it will generally make India a much more powerful power. इस चीज को कंसिडर करते हुए we came up with the idea of integrated theater commands. So 3 commands in a single theater of war might create a problem. There is a need of jointness between the forces of the army, air force, and navy, right? Especially if there is a limited war happening, army, air force, and navy must act in consonance. There is also another dimension here. अब वॉरफेयर में जैसे हमने साइबर सिक्योरिटी में देखा, देयर इज अ कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ साइबर्ड वॉर, राइट? वॉरफेयर इज बिकमिंग मोर एंड मोर entangled in the cyberspace. So when there is cybered war happening, again we need to consider this fact that surveillance, our intelligence, our capabilities of cyber security also have to act in this particular theater only. अब ये भी better हो पाएगा if there is one person who is commanding or a chain of persons who is commanding, so all the command is in one place. अब अगर मान लो मुझे ये responsibility मिलती है, so I can say that okay, the army will act in this way, the air force will act in this way, the navy will act in this way, our cyber forces will act in this way, our intelligence will act in this way. This is the surveillance data that I need. So एक जगह पे jointness and comprehensive responses can be ensured. This is the logic of integrated theater commands in India. Now, the integrated theater commands have also been recommended, as we have seen, by the Kargil Review Committee and the Shekhatkar Committee. Now, what has been done to ensure this, right? Firstly, we have created the Chief of Defense Staff. We've created the Department of Military Affairs. We've created the Defense Cyber Agency. And there are already existing unified commands. So there is an Andaman and Nicobar command. यहाँ पर there is jointness, and there is the Strategic Forces Command that takes care of our nuclear weapons. Here also there is jointness. But other than this, there are single service commands. 7 आर्मी के हैं, 7 एयरफोर्स के हैं, 3 नेवी के हैं. बात अब हो रही है, like the Honorable Raksha Mantri said, of putting all of this in one place, right? So जैसे एक हमारा कमांड होगा वेस्टर्न बॉर्डर का, एक हमारा कमांड होगा ईस्टर्न बॉर्डर का, and one person will be responsible at the top. This is the idea, right? इससे एडवांटेजेस क्या होंगी? One, we will have disciplined responses on operations, coordinated responses, and force multipliers can be leveraged. What are force multipliers? Our cyber abilities, for example, they can multiply our force abilities. So we can, let's say, hack some Pakistani websites or find some information from there and then supply it quickly to the army. अब अगर क्या हो रहा है कि साइबर हमें कोई इंटेलिजेंस मिली, वो पहले जा रही है कहीं और साइबर कमांड के पास, फिर वो आर्मी के पास आ रही है, then the army is deciding how to use it. But if there's one person at the top who knows the capabilities of the army, knows the capabilities of the air force, knows the role of the cyber security as well, he can use this in a much more effective manner. So there will be much more decision making, and through this consonance we will be able to achieve our national security goals. Modern warfare is obviously becoming more and more complex, तो उसमें इस चीज की रिक्वायरमेंट है. Then we will be able to understand the capacity and limitations of each other. So Air Force will know what is the capacity of the Army. Army will know what is the limitation of the Navy. तो ये चीज यहाँ पर होगी. Even future reforms will be better. जब इन आपस में एक इंटर सर्विस अंडरस्टैंडिंग होगी, जो आगे के लिए हमें रिफॉर्म्स करने हैं, आगे के लिए हमें प्रोक्योरमेंट ऑफ आर्म्स करने हैं, दे विल हैपन इन अ मच मोर जॉइंटेड वे, क्योंकि अल्टीमेटली ऑपरेशन तो तीनों फ्रंट्स में होना है. ऐसा तो रेयरली होगा कि कोई वॉर हो रहा है और सिर्फ आर्मी इन्वॉल्व है, वॉर हो रहा है सिर्फ एयरफोर्स इन्वॉल्व है. इवन इन ऑपरेशन सिंदूर वी हैव सीन दैट द बीएसएफ प्लेड अ रोल, द नेवी प्लेड अ रोल. सो दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट. इट विल ऑल्सो create more inter-service loyalty and reduce inter-service rivalry. rather than this fact कि कौन सी सर्विस सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है, आर्मी सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है या एयरफोर्स सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है, rather than creating this rivalry, it will create a feeling of loyalty between the services. So this also becomes fairly important here. अब इसी चीज को सॉर्ट करने के लिए द इंटर सर्विसेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बिल ऑफ 2023 केम. इट्स स्टिल इन द बिल स्टेज, सो वेरी अनलाइकली दैट इट्स आस्क्ड, बट स्टिल हमें इसके कुछ फीचर पता होने चाहिए. मेन फीचर इज दैट इट अलाउज फॉर एस्टैब्लिशिंग ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस with personnel from at least two services with a single commander in chief, right? So one commander in chief who will maintain discipline, he will oversee duties of all the personnel under his command, and he will be a high rank officer, right? तो ऐसा हो सकता है कि let's say there is a person of the army who is heading this inter services organization, and he has army personnel under him also, air force personnel under him also, and navy personnel under him also. And government may extend this provision to other armed forces as well. Now the problem here, the problems with regards to integrated theater commands are as follows. Firstly, आप बात तो कर रहे हो इंटीग्रेटेड थिएटर कमांड क्रिएट करने के लिए, बट अभी तक ट्रेनिंग में, हमारे ऑपरेशंस में, हमारी प्लानिंग में कोई जॉइंटनेस नहीं है. सिर्फ कमांड बनाने से काम नहीं होगा. ट्रेनिंग ऑल्सो देन हैज टू हैपन टुगेदर. देयर आर डिफरेंट स्कूल्स ऑफ ट्रेनिंग. ऑपरेशनल प्लानिंग ऑल्सो नीड्स टू हैपन टुगेदर. देन वी डू नॉट हैव अ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन येट. वहां पर हमने क्रिटिसिज्म पढ़ा था कि पहले अपने गोल्स और प्रिंसिपल्स को तो ऑब्जेक्टिफाई और कोडिफाई कर लो, तब तो जाके यू विल हैव बेटर रिफॉर्म्स. वहां पर हमने ये स्टेटमेंट भी पढ़ी थी, इट इज लाइक पुटिंग द कार्ट बिफोर द हॉर्स इफ यू डोंट हैव अ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन इन प्लेस. देन आर वॉर फाइटिंग मॉड्यूल्स करंटली अ सर्विस स्पेसिफिक. आर्मी का अपना एक खुद का वॉर फाइटिंग मॉड्यूल है, एयरफोर्स का खुद का एक वॉर फाइटिंग मॉड्यूल है. दीज सर्विस स्पेसिफिक वॉर फाइटिंग मॉड्यूल्स फर्स्ट नीड टू बी मेड इनटू अ comprehensive joint war fighting module. Then a premature push for theaterization might create a problem. क्यों? Firstly, आप leadership किसको दोगे? Will an army officer lead this? Will an air force officer lead this? Will a navy officer lead this? This might create challenges. Then role of air power is increasing day by day. If you create commands, abhi at this moment also our air force does not have the number of jets that it requires, right? अब अगर आपने 3 कमांड्स बना दी, अभी तो क्या है कि एयरफोर्स के 7 कमांड्स हैं, सो दे कैन मूव ऑन मूव इन डिफरेंट एरियाज, सो ईच कमांड कैन फंक्शन इन डिफरेंट एरियाज. बट आपने मान लो कहा कि एक कमांड ये है, सारे हमारे एसेट्स यहाँ होंगे, और एक कमांड ये है, दूसरे सारे एसेट्स यहाँ होंगे, एक कमांड ये है, सारे एसेट्स यहाँ होंगे. देन रोल ऑफ एयर पावर इज इंक्रीजिंग एंड यू डोंट हैव इनफ जेट्स एंड यू डोंट हैव इनफ एयरक्राफ्ट येट, राइट? अभी भी वहां पर कुछ डेफिशिएंसी है, तो अब आप इनको एलोकेट कैसे करोगे, राइट? सो दे माइट बी एन एलोकेशन प्रॉब्लम. एंड लास्टली, इट माइट लीड टू प्राइमेसी ऑफ वन सर्विस. एक सर्विस, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि किसी एक सर्विस को बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस मिल जाए. एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ दिस इज कि अभी तक हमने चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ बनाया है, बट ऑल CDS have always come from the army. Why not from the navy? Why not from the air force? So this might be a challenge. Now looking at this, what is the way forward? Firstly, jointness should come first in training, operations and planning. We need to draft our national security doctrine, and once that is made, then this reform makes much more sense. Then we need to pilot one integrated theater command properly. पहले इस पायलट प्रोजेक्ट करके उसको समझ के फिर करना चाहिए. Then we need to learn from global examples. For example, the chief of staff of the United Nations, It's called the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? This is what we can learn from कि वो कैसे इसको काम करते हैं. And we need to develop purple personnel. What are purple personnel? These are people who have information about they have understanding of all the three forces. पहले हमें कुछ ऐसे स्पेशल लोगों को ट्रेन करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि सिर्फ एक कमांडर से तो बात नहीं बनेगी, उनके नीचे भी बहुत लोगों को होना है. So there need to be personnel who understand the capabilities of the army, navy and air force together, right? अब इसी इंटीग्रेशन और जॉइंटनेस और सिविल मिलिट्री रिलेशंस को बेटर करने के लिए we also had something called the Chief of Defense Staff created. Now this is again something that the Raksha Mantri has recommended. So Chief of Defense Staff was recommended by the Kargil Review Committee as well as the Nilesh Chandra Task Force on Defense, and this is something we have executed. So here we will see what are the functions of the Chief of Defense Staff, what are the criticisms, and what is the way forward. What are the functions of the Chief of Defense Staff? ये पहले समझते हैं. So firstly, the Chief of Defense Staff is the presiding secretary of the Department of Military Affairs. So that means he has to answer to the Parliament on defense matters, and he also has to ensure jointness in procurement, training as well as staffing, right? But read these words carefully: procurement, training and staffing. He does not have any operational capability, and this is a major criticism because operational capability nahi hai. He can't lead operations together. Yes, he can answer to the Parliament, and procurement, training और staffing में थोड़ी बहुत jointness ensure करनी है, right? He is also the principal military advisor to the Minister and Ministry of Defense on all matters of inter-service integration. So if the Ministry of Defense now wants to go for integrated theatre commands, they would seek the advice of the Chief of Defense Staff. He is the principal chairman of the Chief of Staff's committee. What does this mean? जो Chief of Staff हैं आर्मी के, there are three Chiefs of Staff: there's the Army Chief, Navy Chief and the Air Force Chief. All of them sit on one committee. इस committee के permanent chairman हैं हमारे Chief of Defense Staff, right? जो ऑलरेडी इंटर सर्विसेज एजेंसीज बनी हुई हैं, जैसे कि डिफेंस स्पेस एजेंसी, डिफेंस साइबर एजेंसी, इनके ऊपर इनका कमांड है. नाउ the problem is these roles are bureaucratic and advisory in nature. They are not operational in nature. So the issues with regards to them is, one, the issue of civil military relations. If you have a Chief of Defense Staff and you have given the Chief of Defense Staff secretarial roles, what happens then to the role of the Defense Secretary? And this might create rivalry and turf wars. Turf war is a term that you'll hear a lot when you enter the civil services. कि मेरे टर्फ पे या मेरी in my area of operation, only I'm the one who should be given the power. There should not be overlapping powers or overlapping jurisdiction. Then the Chief of Defense Staff has also been given certain bureaucratic roles, but any Chief of Defense Staff is an army personnel or an armed forces personnel. They are not going to come from a bureaucratic background, so they might not have these roles कि files में noting कैसे करनी है, etc etc. This is not their job, but they have to answer to the Parliament. They have to be a military advisor. They have to pick up a lot of files. This is not the job of an army personnel. Then there is a lack of clear command structures and clear responsibilities to the Chief of Defense Staff. They have not been given operational capabilities, and more role is of advisory nature, as we have seen. So if you look at the international systems, वहां पर ये नहीं होता. International system में the responsibility command structure is very clear. This is not happening here. So what is the way forward? Firstly, clarify the roles and responsibilities clearly. कि इनका क्या काम है, Defense Secretary का क्या काम है. Now, Shri N.N. Vohra, who is former Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, he wrote a book, and in his book this recommendation was written that we must have a Vice Chief of Defense Staff. जो भी इनके bureaucratic roles हैं, that can be given to the Vice Chief of Defense Staff. और जो CDS, actual CDS हैं, let him focus on the military roles. Right? He should not be looking at files of training and staffing. He should actually be looking at army operations and armed forces personnel integration. Right? Then we need to formulate the national security doctrine. Right? Many recommendations have been given. ये हम topic पढ़ भी चुके हैं. Then rather than having integrated theatre commands, in the beginning, we first need to have an operational command over them. At least जो integrated theatre commands हैं उनको बनाने की बात कर रहे हो, उनके ऊपर तो जो ऑपरेशनल कमांड है दैट नीड्स टू एंड विद द चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ. अब उनको सिर्फ ब्यूरोक्रेटिक रोल्स मत दो. अगर आप आईटीसी बनाने की बात कर रहे हो तो उन आईटीसी का सारा रोल पहले चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ को दो और इस ऑफिस को एम्पावर करो. Then a continuous evaluation of this office is needed, and jointness in armed forces is obviously one of the requirements of our defense reforms, and this we've already seen. right? Now let's look at our procedure for defense procurement. Now mind you, the procedure here is fairly complex. Procedure यहाँ पर काफी complex है, so we don't need to go into the details of the procedure. I will tell you the details of the procedure only to make you understand the criticisms of this procedure later. आपसे कोई procedure नहीं पूछेगा, आपसे पूछा जाएगा about what can be done to make this procedure better, right? Alright. तो पहले बात करते हैं what is the need of procurement. क्यों हमें procurement करनी होती है? See, we need to strengthen our indigenous capabilities, right? And we need to overcome the legacy issues that India has. India is facing a lot of security threats internally and externally, and we need to incorporate emerging technologies. And we can't have unlimited amount of spending on defense also. So to address security threats, overcoming our legacy issues, to ensure that we have strength in our capabilities and emerging technologies are integrated, with fiscal consolidation and cost efficiency, we need to have a proper procurement procedure कि कौन से equipments हम लेंगे, right? So there needs to be a proper procedure of procurement कि कहाँ से, कब, कैसे और कौन से equipments हम खरीदेंगे. Only then these things can be ensured. अब if you look at the evolution, तो industrial policy आई थी इंडिया की 1956 में. There we focused on public sector undertakings for defense production. फिर हमने बात करी of license production. What does this mean? जैसे कि हमारी we had a treaty of peace and friendship with the Soviet Union. We said that we will manufacture their products here. So, for example, there is a T-90 tank, right? We will manufacture this T-90 tank in India, but that did not mean that we have a technology transfer. Technology transfer is that we learned the technologies of that tank and now we can manufacture it on our own. Technology transfer नहीं हो रहा था उस टाइम पे, only license लेके production यहाँ पर हो रही थी. Then after economic liberalization of the 1990s, we diversified our imports, right? तो पहले आप देखोगे most of our legacy equipment is Russian. So you look at the Sukhoi planes, the MiG planes, they're all Russian. But after the LPG reforms, we've also procured from other parts of the world. So Rafale, most recently we all know about, we've got from the French. We've also got the Dassault Mirage from the French, right? We've got the C-130 Globemaster from the Americans. So we've diversified our imports. And then after the Public Accounts Committee report of 1989, we formalized our procurement guidelines, right? इसके बाद there was also the Kargil Review Committee, and finally बना Defense Procurement Procedure of 2002, and अब है Defense Acquisition Procedure of 2020, which is the most recent guideline on how we are supposed to do acquisition of defense items. अब इसकी प्रोसेस क्या है? देखो, प्रोसेस ब्रॉडली समझनी है, इस पे क्वेश्चन नहीं आएगा, मैं भी आपको डिटेल में नहीं बता रहा हूँ, बस एक ब्रॉड समझ लेते हैं प्रोसेस है क्या. Firstly, a 10-year plan is created. So there is the headquarters of the Integrated Defense Staff. A 10-year plan is created, right? इस plan में क्या होता है? We make a integrated capability development plan. तो हम ये बात करते हैं कि what is the problems that we need to solve over the next 10 years, and in this time how we will acquire equipment to solve that problem. एक पहले एक broad plan बनता है. This is approved by the Defense Acquisition Council. ठीक है, ये हो गया. Then जब ये ब्रॉड प्लान बन जाता है ऑफ कि हमें क्या प्रॉब्लम्स हैं और क्या सॉल्व करनी है, देन द इंटीग्रेटेड डिफेंस स्टाफ हेडक्वार्टर्स, देन इन कंसल्टेशन विद सर्विस हेडक्वार्टर्स मींस आर्मी, नेवी, एयरफोर्स हेडक्वार्टर्स, देन दे मेक अ प्लान फॉर द नेक्स्ट 5 years कि अगले 5 साल में हमें क्या क्या चीजें प्रोक्योर करनी है. दिस इज अगेन अप्रूव्ड बाय द डिफेंस एक्विजिशन काउंसिल, राइट? तो पहले 10 years का एक ब्रॉड प्लान बना कि यार हमारी क्या कैपेबिलिटीज हमें डेवलप करनी है ओवर 10 years. फिर एक 5 साल का प्लान बना दैट व्हाट वी हैव टू अक्वायर ओवर द नेक्स्ट 5 years, एंड इसमें हम आर्मी, नेवी, एयरफोर्स से बात करते हैं. एंड फाइनली दिस डिफेंस कैपिटल एक्विजिशन प्लान इज सेंट टू सर्विस हेडक्वार्टर्स. तो ये प्लान फिर जाता है फाइनली आर्मी, नेवी और एयरफोर्स के पास कि यार हमें ये चीजें प्रोक्योर करनी है, अब आप बताओ. नाउ दीज ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ दिस आर्मी, नेवी एंड एयरफोर्स दे इंडिपेंडेंटली क्रिएट एन एनुअल एक्विजिशन प्लान कि हम अगले साल में क्या क्या अक्वायर करेंगे. तो पहले एक 10-year प्लान बना एट एन इंटीग्रेटेड लेवल कि हमें क्या कैपेबिलिटीज चाहिए. फिर एक 5-year प्लान बना कि हमें क्या क्या प्रोक्योर करना है. ये 5-year प्लान हमने आर्मी, नेवी और एयरफोर्स को दिया. फिर इन लोगों ने एक 1-year प्लान बनाया कि उन्हें आर्मी को स्पेसिफिकली क्या चाहिए अगले साल में, नेवी को क्या चाहिए, एयरफोर्स को क्या चाहिए. दिस इज अगेन then consolidated in one place by the integrated service headquarters and finally approved by the defense acquisition council. तो एक लेयर्ड प्रोसेस है. अब ये प्रोसेस आपसे कोई नहीं पूछेगा, बट यू नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट द प्रोसेस इज कॉम्प्लेक्स एंड देयर इज लैक ऑफ जॉइंटनेस हियर. दिस इज अ मेजर क्रिटिसिज्म ऑफ आवर डिफेंस एक्विजिशन प्रोसीजर. अब क्या फीचर्स हैं, हमारी पॉलिसी क्या है, दैट वी मूव फॉर फोर्सेबल इंडिजनाइजेशन. हमने देखा पॉजिटिव इंडिजनाइजेशन लिस्ट, ठीक है, ये चीज हमने देखी. तो दिस इज समथिंग दैट वी आर डूइंग. हमने सोचा है टेक्नोलॉजी इंटीग्रेट करने का. एंड पहले सिर्फ आर्म फोर्सेस का होता था, बट इवन नाउ बॉडीज लाइक इंडियन कोस्ट गार्ड, बॉर्डर रोड्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, इन पे भी हमने फोकस करना स्टार्ट किया है. राइट नाउ देर आर फ्यू प्रोक्योरमेंट कैटेगरीज. देर इज फॉर एग्जाम्पल, ये कैटेगरीज याद करने की जरूरत नहीं है. देर इज वन, बाय इंडियन IDDM. व्हाट डज दिस मीन? दैट वी आर बाइंग फ्रॉम एन इंडियन वेंडर and the design, development and manufacturing will happen in India. Then we are second category is we are buying from an Indian manufacturer, but design, development and manufacturing might have happened abroad. कंपनी इंडियन है जिससे हम खरीद रहे हैं, बट उन्होंने कहाँ पे अपना इक्विपमेंट डिजाइन किया, डेवलप किया, मैन्युफैक्चर किया, कहीं भी हो सकता है पूरी दुनिया में. देन देर इज बाय एंड मेक इंडियन. देन देर इज बाय ग्लोबल, कि ग्लोबल कंपनी से खरीद रहे हैं. बाय एंड मेक इंडियन में क्या है, that okay, there is an Indian company but it's going to make in India but might not be designing and developing in India. Then buy global and manufacture in India. इसका मतलब क्या है कि हम खरीद रहे हैं कोई इंडियन कंपनी से, but this Indian company has a venture with some foreign company. The foreign company is called the original equipment manufacturer. उसके साथ इनका कोई joint provision है and they are going to have a joint venture together. And lastly we are going to buy global. इसमें एक ग्लोबल कंपनी से खरीद रहे हैं. लेट्स से हम वी आर बाइंग फ्रॉम अ फ्रेंच कंपनी, बट देयर आर सम ऑफसेट रिक्वायरमेंट्स. ऑफसेट भी हम पढ़ेंगे. राइट तो ऐसी कुछ कैटेगरीज हैं. यू कैन जस्ट मेंशन दैट कैटेगरीज आर प्रेजेंट. डिटेल में कोई नहीं पूछने वाला, बिकॉज वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स एनीवे. डिफेंस एक्विजिशन प्रोसीजर डॉक्यूमेंट है 600 पेजेस. और प्लीज मेरी तरह उसको पढ़ने की ट्राई करके अपना टाइम वेस्ट मत करना. जो उसमें से रेलिवेंट है मैं यहाँ लिख दिया. राइट अब इसमें भी अगर हम कोई इंडियन डिजाइंड, डेवलप्ड एंड मैन्युफैक्चर इक्विपमेंट खरीद रहे हैं, उसमें भी कुछ होता है कि कुछ गवर्नमेंट फंडेड प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, कुछ इंडस्ट्री फंडेड प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, एंड कुछ प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं फॉर इंपोर्ट सब्स्टिट्यूशन. देयर इज ऑल्सो अ स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनर मॉडल. तो ये कीवर्ड्स हम लिख सकते हैं अगर इस टाइप का कोई क्वेश्चन हमसे स्पेसिफिकली आ जाए, बट वेरी अनलाइकली. इसके ऊपर आएगा कि इसमें क्या प्रॉब्लम्स हैं, क्या सोल्यूशंस हैं, वो हम देखेंगे. अब हमारी पॉलिसी में हमने ये कहा है कि इन्हीं कैटेगरीज में देर आर सर्टन कैटेगरीज वेयर वी विल गिव प्रेफरेंस टू माइक्रो, स्मॉल एंड मीडियम एंटरप्राइजेस, एंड वी विल फॉस्टर इनोवेशन थ्रू प्रोजेक्ट्स लाइक द IDEX. Okay. Now, what are the various features of our defense acquisition procedure? Firstly, there is a negative import list or a positive indigenization list कि चीज़ें हमें इंडिया से ही खरीदनी है. Then there are certain projects of national importance, जैसे एरो इंजन बनाना. कावेरी इंजन फॉर द तेजस जेट फॉर एग्जाम्पल इज कंसिडर्ड अ प्रोजेक्ट ऑफ नेशनल इंपॉर्टेंस, और इन प्रोजेक्ट्स को हम ट्राई कर रहे हैं कि इंडिया में ही कर पाए. देन देर इज एन ऑफसेट प्रोसीजर. व्हाट डज दिस मीन? कि मान लो गवर्नमेंट ने किसी फॉरेन कंपनी से कुछ खरीदा. लेट्स से वी आर फ्रॉम दसॉ विच इज अ फॉरेन कंपनी, वी आर बाइंग द रफाल प्लेन. ठीक है, और रफाल प्लेन खरीदने के लिए हमने दसॉ को दिए $100 मिलियन. तो ऑफसेट का क्या मतलब है कि दसॉ पे अब एक रिक्वायरमेंट है कि इसका 30% दे हैव टू नाउ स्पेंड इन इंडिया फॉर डेवलपमेंट. तो वो $30 मिलियन वो इंडिया में स्पेंड करेंगे. राइट एंड दे विल डेवलप समथिंग इन इंडिया. राइट ताकि आगे चल के जॉइंट वेंचर हो सके, टेक्नोलॉजी ट्रांसफर हो सके. अब इसी टाइम पे यू माइट हैव हर्ड दैट दसॉ हैड एन एग्रीमेंट विद हिंदुस्तान एरोनॉटिक्स लिमिटेड. राइट तो इस टाइप की चीजें, और दिस इज व्हाट अ डिफेंस ऑफसेट इज, दैट गवर्नमेंट विल पे 100 मिलियन टू दसॉ. दसॉ विल देन स्पेंड 30 मिलियन. इट इज अ रिक्वायरमेंट दैट दे हैव टू री इन्वेस्ट 30 मिलियन इन इंडिया, ताकि इससे थोड़ी जॉब क्रिएशन हो. पहले क्या होता था कि इंडिया में कंपोनेंट्स मैन्युफैक्चर कर देती थी कंपनीज, कि डसॉ से हमने रफाल खरीदा, वो कहते हैं ठीक है हम प्लेन के व्हील्स इंडिया में बना लेंगे. राइट बट नाउ वी आर मूविंग टुवर्ड्स फिनिश्ड इक्विपमेंट्स, एंड देयर इज ऑल्सो अ प्रोविजन फॉर लीजिंग, कि हम कोई इक्विपमेंट्स रेंट पे भी ले सकते हैं. राइट दिस इज ऑल्सो अलाउड इन आर डिफेंस एक्विजिशन प्रोसीजर. एंड FDI पहले 49% था, नाउ वी हैव मेड इट 74% अंडर द ऑटोमेटिक रूट्स. बट कुछ एरियाज में जैसे इंडियन डिजाइन, डेवलप्ड एंड मैन्युफैक्चर एरियाज में अभी भी 49% पे ही है. राइट तो इफ यू लुक एट द डिफेंस एक्विजिशन प्रोसीजर, इफ दे आस्क अस कि इसकी प्रोसेस क्या है, तो हम ये प्लान्स के बारे में बता सकते हैं. वी कैन से दैट देयर आर वेरियस कैटेगरीज. देयर इज, दिस इज द पॉलिसी. देयर आर थिंग्स लाइक ऑफसेट, लीजिंग एंड FDI. दीज आर द फीचर्स. ठीक है, अब एक चीज और थी इसमें, स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप मॉडल. स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप मॉडल में क्या है, दैट इंडियन कंपनी और एक ओरिजिनल इक्विपमेंट मैन्युफैक्चरर यानी कि फॉरेन कंपनी, they will come in a strategic partnership. The OEM will give hand holding support to the Indian company जिसके साथ वो ऑफसेट प्रोसीजर कर रही है, एंड लेटर इट में बिकम अ जॉइंट वेंचर एज वेल. तो अगर हमसे फीचर्स पूछ लिए गलती से डिफेंस एक्विजिशन प्रोसीजर के, तो एक तो बहुत खुश हो जाना क्योंकि और किसी को नहीं आता होगा ये, ठीक है. और इसमें हम ब्रॉडली ये पॉइंट्स लिख देंगे. क्वेश्चन आएगा लाइकली वो इस पे आएगा कि क्या चैलेंजेस हैं एंड व्हाट टू डू नेक्स्ट. तो चैलेंजेस क्या हैं? दैट फर्स्टली ऑफसेटिंग रिक्वायरमेंट्स आर देयर बट वो उतने अच्छे से फॉलो नहीं हो रही हैं, राइट. समटाइम्स दीज ऑफसेट्स आर नॉट implemented in letter and spirit. This becomes a challenge. Then leasing is a challenge. हमने लीजिंग अलाउ तो कर रखी है कि हम रेंटेड इक्विपमेंट ले लेंगे, बट इन द लॉन्ग रन दिस कॉस्ट मोर मनी. देन अगर आप प्रोसेस देखो, प्रोसेस काफी लेयर्ड है. आपने देखा होगा कि पहले ये प्लान बनेगा, फिर ये प्लान बनेगा, फिर वो उस हेडक्वार्टर जाएगा, एक्सेट्रा. दिस लीड्स टू ब्यूरोक्रेटिक डिलेज एंड एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव बर्डन. देन FDI is still limited in certain categories. 74% हमने कर दिया है, but in certain categories it's still at 49%. Then there is, आपने जो ये कैटेगरीज हैं, ये कैटेगरीज जो मैं आपको बता रहा था ये क्यों बनी है, ये देखने के लिए बनी है कि इसमें कितना इंडिजिनस कंटेंट होगा. कि इस कैटेगरी का कुछ खरीद रहे हैं तभी मानेंगे जब इसमें इंडिजिनस कंटेंट 50% से ज्यादा है. बट द चैलेंज इज हाउ डू यू वेरीफाई कि किसी चीज में इंडिजिनस कंटेंट कितना है. तो दिस वेरिफिकेशन इज अ चैलेंज, राइट. देन वी आर गेटिंग लाइसेंसेस टू मैन्युफैक्चर बट टेक्नोलॉजी ट्रांसफर नहीं हो रहा है, right. जैसे टेक्नोलॉजी ट्रांसफर would mean that India then gets that technology and has the ability to manufacture that technology, but technology transfer is not happening. And there are other challenges such as MSMEs को अभी तक हमने सपोर्ट नहीं किया है, and bureaucratic procedures हैं जिनमें अभी तक रिफॉर्म नहीं हुआ है. अब what is the way forward? Firstly, we need to have an emphasis on offsets. अगर हम एक फॉरेन कंपनी को पे कर रहे हैं फॉर डिफेंस इक्विपमेंट, एटलीस्ट वो कुछ पैसा इंडिया में इन्वेस्ट तो करें. देन ये जो प्रोक्योरमेंट की कैटेगरीज हैं दे नीड टू बी स्ट्रीमलाइंड फर्दर सो दैट इसका इंडिजिनस कंटेंट का रिक्वायरमेंट हम एक्चुअली चेक कर पाए. देन देयर इज अ नीड फॉर कोऑर्डिनेशन. अभी हमने क्या देखा, आर्मी का अलग प्लान, एयरफोर्स का अलग प्लान, नेवी का अलग प्लान. दिस नीड्स टू बी स्ट्रीमलाइंड एंड सो दैट वी कैन हैव कोऑर्डिनेशन. देन वी नीड अ डेडिकेटेड एक्विजिशन कार्डर. अभी जो डिफेंस मिनिस्ट्रीज में सिविल सर्वेंट्स हैं वही ये काम कर रहे हैं, बट दे माइट नॉट हैव द टेक्निकल एक्सपर्टीज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर दिस. देन ऑफ कोर्स फॉर्मुलेट योर नेशनल सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन. इस टाइप के किसी भी ब्रॉड क्वेश्चन पे आप ये चीज लिख सकते हो, बिकॉज हमने देखा बहुत लोगों ने इस पे रेकमेंड किया है, राइट. देन मोर रिसोर्स एलोकेशन नीड्स टू बी डन ऑन डिफेंस एक्विजिशन एंड वी नीड टू मॉनिटर एंड रिव्यू आवर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन. नाउ प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड दैट even if you are buying from an Indian company, right, it still means that there is going to be a defense acquisition procedure. समझा देता हूं. जैसे मान लो there is a DRDO manufactures something called let's say आकाश मिसाइल और ब्रह्मोस मिसाइल, राइट. उन्होंने आकाश या ब्रह्मोस मिसाइल बनाई इन कोलैबोरेशन विद रशिया. इंडियन आर्मी को ब्रह्मोस मिसाइल चाहिए, तो ऐसा नहीं है कि ऑटोमेटिकली आ जाएगी. Here also the defense acquisition procedure will be followed, right. So defense acquisition procedure is not just from buying for foreign companies, it is also from buying from Indian companies. किसी इंडियन स्टार्टअप ने कोई नया केबलर वेस्ट बनाया, आर्मी को चाहिए, तो वहां पर भी DAP ही फॉलो होगा, राइट. एंड इसमें पहले भी करप्शन के भी एलिगेशंस लगे हैं. यू माइट हैव हर्ड अबाउट द ऑगस्टा वेस्टलैंड स्कैम, राइट. दिस वाज फॉर हेलीकॉप्टर्स फॉर VIP. तो ये जो स्कैम था इस टाइप का आप ये भी कर सकते हो. बिकॉज ऑफ सच अ लेयर्ड प्रोसेस, टेक्निकल प्रोसेस, इट गिव्स अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर करप्शन. ऑलराइट. नाउ रिलेटेड टू दिस, जैसे हम डिफेंस रिफॉर्म्स में देख रहे हैं, देयर इज ऑल्सो द रिक्वायरमेंट फॉर पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप इन डिफेंस, राइट. क्यों चाहिए? देखो, वेरी सिंपल टॉपिक, हमें बस कुछ कीवर्ड्स याद रखने हैं. We need indigenization. We need to have our strategic, autonomy. If PPP happens in defense and things are being procured, if things are being made in India, there'll be a fillip to innovation and we'll get export potential as well. But challenges क्या हैं? एक capital intensive industry है. Defense equipment is very costly. आपने रफाल के टाइम पे, if you were following the news, you would know that one jet costs close to 1600 crore rupees. One Rafale jet. Right? It's very, very costly. There are security and concerns over intellectual property. Then there is regulatory friction, क्योंकि quality audits होंगी, licensing होगी, और fragmented demand forecasting. You can use these words. जैसे अभी हमारी जो demand forecasting है कि आर्मी को क्या चाहिए, ये चीज ही clearly नहीं लिखी हुई है. There are so many fragmented plans that have to be made. जब ये problem आएगी, how will we have a single place in which, how will we have a single place in which the private sector can then go and say that okay, we are doing partnerships to create this particular thing, right? वो पहले से ही पता होना चाहिए. Now, what is the way forward for this? We need to have tri-service capability and an indigenization roadmap. We need to have single window clearance, and we need to have digital infrastructure for collaborative design with zero trust capability. Zero trust means you don't trust anybody, so you make a very secure system ताकि उसमें कोई cyber breaches ना हो. Now, what are the initiatives that we have taken for this? One is the Innovation for Defense Excellence Project. This is by the Defense Innovation Organization. It is the flagship innovation funnel of the Ministry of Defense. यहाँ पर होता क्या है? यहाँ पर let's say हम पहले डिफेंस पब्लिक सेक्टर अंडरटेकिंग को या फिर डिफेंस पब्लिक सेक्टर अंडरटेकिंग या फिर जो हमारी सर्विसेज चीफ्स हैं जैसे आर्मी, नेवी और एयरफोर्स, ये लोग पहले अपनी प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट बताते हैं कि हमें ये प्रॉब्लम है. We let's say have a problem that we need a hypersonic missile that can travel 5,000 kilometers. ये प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट हो गई. Then various innovations are checked around the world. There are startups, there are private innovators who will then set their applications. उनमें से there is a competitive selection and we give a spark grant contract, right? And we also give them in incubation support. अब अगर उन्होंने कोई प्रोटोटाइप बनाया, कुछ डेवलपमेंट करा, कुछ आईपी बनाया, दिस कैन देन बी प्रोक्योर्ड, राइट? इसके अंदर कुछ सब स्कीम्स हैं. दिस इज द स्पार्क स्कीम. दिस इज फॉर अर्ली स्टेज प्रोटोटाइप्स. कोई नया प्रोटोटाइप है, फाइनल प्रोडक्ट नहीं है, आपके पास बस प्रोटोटाइप है, उसके लिए हो सकता है. देन देयर इज द आईडेक्स प्राइम. दिस इज अ हाई वैल्यू ग्रांट फॉर अ वेरी हाई वैल्यू प्रोडक्ट. लेट्स से आप जेट बना रहे हो, वेरी हाई वैल्यू प्रोडक्ट, मिसाइल बना रहे हो, उसके लिए आईडेक्स प्राइम. देन देयर इज अदिति स्कीम. This is for critical and strategic technologies like quantum technology, for example. Then there is Mission Dev Space, which is for innovation in space defense, in the space sector. IDEX के अलावा हमने क्या initiatives लिए हैं? We've taken the Technology Development Fund. We've talked about defense industrial corridors in Tamil Nadu and in UP. We have the defense investor cells where there is single window clearance for licensing. And there is the Strigen portal where we write about the items that can be taken for indigenization. Now, this completes our topic of defense reforms, right? इसमें एक topic हम और पढ़ेंगे अभी, which is AI in defense, and we will also read about drones in defense. इसी क्लास में देखेंगे. This can also be asked in defense reforms, but this is not directly with what India is doing. तो जैसे हमने यहाँ पर, we saw the statements of the रक्षा मंत्री, तो यहाँ पर हमने डिफेंस एक्सपोर्ट्स देख लिया है. अब हमने अग्निपथ स्कीम के बारे में देख लिया है, हमने चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ देख लिया, हमने इंटर सर्विसेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बिल देख लिया, इंटीग्रेटेड थिएटर कमांड्स के बारे में देख लिया. We've read about procurement and we've read about public-private partnership. The one thing that is left here is technology and AI in drones. ये दो टॉपिक हम और देखेंगे अभी. इसके अलावा now what all is left in internal security? Although we have very comprehensively covered internal security, I am sure that if you guys are reading from here, you don't need to do anything else. अगर आपने ये 4 लेक्चर देख लिए तो इसके बियॉन्ड अगर कोई क्वेश्चन आ गया एक तो किसी को नहीं आएगा, एंड यू विल हैव मच बेटर कंटेंट देन मोस्ट ऑफ योर पीयर्स. अब व्हाट आर द थिंग्स दैट आर लेफ्ट? वन टॉपिक दैट इज लेफ्ट इज सोशल मीडिया एंड इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी, राइट? अब मैंने ये टॉपिक आपको साइबर सिक्योरिटी के साथ इसलिए नहीं कराया, लास्ट ईयर कराया था, एग्जैक्ट क्वेश्चन भी आया था नोट से लास्ट ईयर. इस बार मैं इसलिए नहीं करा रहा हूँ बिकॉज इट केम लास्ट ईयर, राइट? सो 2 years in a row दिस टॉपिक कमिंग इज वेरी अनलाइकली. आई स्टिल टीच यू दिस, बट उतना ज्यादा फोकस इस पर नहीं करेंगे, राइट? अभी इसके बाद मैं आपको यही टॉपिक पढ़ाऊंगा. वन मोर टॉपिक दैट इज लेफ्ट इज द आइडिया ऑफ वेरियस सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस एंड देयर मैंडेट. ये एक हमारा सिलेबस का पॉइंट है, वेरियस सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस एंड देयर मैंडेट. इसमें मैंडेट में उन्होंने एस्पा पे क्वेश्चन पूछा है, एनआईए पे पहले क्वेश्चन पूछा है. दीज आर थिंग्स वी हैव ऑलरेडी डन, राइट? इसमें वो एक क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं मे बी ऑन द कोस्ट गार्ड दिस टाइम, तो दिस बिकॉज इट हैज बीन इन द न्यूज, तो वो हम देखेंगे. और एक ब्रॉड चैलेंजेस ऑफ सेंट्रल आर्म्ड पुलिस फोर्सेस, ऑल्दो इस पे क्वेश्चन नहीं आया बट आ सकता है सीएपीएफ की मैंडेट पे. तो सीएपीएफ की मैंडेट्स और एक ब्रॉड चैलेंज ऑफ सीएपीएफ वी विल सी. देन one last topic that will be left is threats to internal security from state and non-state actors. अब ये वैसा टॉपिक है जो मैं आपको नहीं पढ़ाऊंगा. आई विल जस्ट गिव यू अ लिस्ट हियर बिकॉज अगर आप यहाँ पे देखो, आप यहाँ पे चाइना के थ्रेट्स, पाकिस्तान से थ्रेट्स, वेरियस स्टेट्स से थ्रेट्स, और नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स में आप लेफ्ट विंग एक्सट्रीमिज्म, साइबर थ्रेट्स, नॉर्थ ईस्ट इंसर्जेंसी, जम्मू एंड कश्मीर इंसर्जेंसी, टेररिज्म, ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम, ये आप सारा यहाँ पे लिख सकते हो, राइट। तो ये एक्चुअली हमारे सिलेबस की समरी है। सो दिस टॉपिक इज नॉट समथिंग दैट नीड्स टू बी रेड, आई विल जस्ट गिव यू अ लिस्ट हियर, इसमें कुछ ज़्यादा पढ़ने का है नहीं। दिस इज व्हाट वील सी नाउ, ऑल्सो विल सी इट ब्रॉडली बिकॉज पहले आ चुका है, दोबारा डिटेल अगले ही साल सेम क्वेश्चन रिपीट होने की चांस कम है, फिर भी जस्ट टू कवर आर बेसिस वी आर सीइंग इट। देन वेरियस सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेज एंड देयर मैंडेट, इसमें हम एज पर एनआईए देख चुके हैं। सेंट्रल कोस्ट गार्ड, सॉरी कोस्ट गार्ड हमें देखना है, और सीएपीएफ के बारे में हमें देखना है। देन देर आर फ्यू अदर स्मॉल टॉपिक्स। किन स्मॉल टॉपिक्स की बात कर रहा हूँ मैं, जिनके आने के चांसेस हैं, जैसे हमारा एक रह गया है एआई इन डिफेंस, ड्रोन्स इन डिफेंस, देर हैव बीन न्यू टेलीकॉम रूल्स दिस टाइम, तो हो सकता है वो टेलीकॉम रूल्स पे पूछ लें। इस टाइप के कुछ स्मॉल टॉपिक्स और हम देखेंगे। सो मे बी आई थिंक 1 hour मोर एंड दैट in this video, and then we'll finish our discussion of internal security. All right, so let us now come to social media and internal security. देखो एक टॉपिक लास्ट ईयर आया था, so it being repeated again is unlikely, but we'll read it still just to cover our bases. So what are the characteristics of social media? It is participation based, there is a lot of openness involved, it is conversation based, communities are built, right, and of course openness is there. Now in characteristics के basis पे, see, if you look at social media, most of them are operating on algorithms, right? They are operating on algorithms, they are operating on algorithms which we don't know about. तो होता क्या है, जैसे मान लो I have, let's say, a bias towards a particular community, and I am seeing reels and posts that are biased towards that community. In the future, the algorithm will keep recommending me those reels only. So it creates something called a black box society, where a black box is something like you are surrounded by the same content, right? And it's creating an echo chamber. The algorithm itself is a black box because nobody knows how it works. They don't declare how it works. You don't know how you get recommended content, and it's creating an echo chamber. So I will be in conversation, or I'll be building communities with those people that have the same viewpoints as me. There will be no diversity of opinions here, right? There'll be no openness here. And obviously a major problem here is the spread of fake news and fake information. Now this creates a situation where social media becomes a major challenge to internal security. So what are the threats by social media to internal security? Firstly, of course, there is the problem of misinformation, right? जैसे कोविड-19 के ड्यूरिंग हमने देखा कि बहुत मिसइन्फॉर्मेशन थी कि ये खा लो तो यू विल बी क्योर्ड एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. Then we've also seen the case of fake bomb threats coming to various Indian cities through social media. Then recruitment for extremist groups. So ISIS and neo-Nazi groups have used social media. For example, it's well known that ISIS does use Telegram, right? Then there is communal tension. So social media was used during the Delhi riots of 2020. Then the phenomena of cyberbullying. कोई भी कहीं पे कोई भी comment कर सकता है. They can say anything about you, and even this goes a step further, where people are using even things like revenge porn against other individuals. So this becomes a problem. So even protest mobilization can happen. Now this is not a bad thing if done in a legitimate manner, but sometimes we see social media being used for protests where it actually becomes a threat to the internal security of the nation. And here you should remember the example of the January 6th incident in the US. Then, since all of our data is out there on these social media sites, a data breach is also possible. So for example, a Facebook data breach in 2021, the WazirX data breach that happened recently, and also it is facilitating organized crime, right? So recently there was a news that the Delhi police, I think, has busted a drug deal by looking at information on Reddit, right? So although it claims anonymity, there is no anonymity anywhere in the world, but even organized crime is also happening through these social media sites. So this becomes a problem. Now let's talk about this radicalization by social media, right? This is specifically terror groups going for radicalization through social media. अब अगर terror groups पे question आता है, I'm just reminding you, what are we supposed to do? Propaganda, recruitment, training, planning, execution, and fundraising. ये लिखते ही you will have 6 points to write, right? So firstly, radicalization में, now I'm just giving you general points here, that content creation is happening here. So for example, Al-Qaeda's Inspire magazine or digital magazine of the ISIS called Dabia is available on social media. Then the Boogaloo movement in the US has been using Facebook groups to disseminate information. This is a far right-wing extremist movement, right? This has been happening. Then vulnerable groups are being targeted, right? So there are neo-Nazi groups who are using Discord to engage with vulnerable populations. Then grooming and indoctrination happens here. So example, there's been examples of the Taliban using Telegram, for example, and there has been activation and mobilization. For example, the calls to action by Al Qaeda for lone wolf attacks in the US. So this also happens through social media. Now, what are the initiatives that we have taken? Firstly, there is a fake news monitoring portal that we have seen. The PIB also has a recently developed fact check unit to counter fake news. Then there is a cybercrime prevention against women and children portal that is there. That is there to prevent any cyber crimes against these particularly vulnerable groups. Then we have social media labs that will look at evidences or instances from social media that can be used. Then JNK police has an action plan for countering radicalization through social media. Then DRDO has developed something called a network traffic analysis, also known as NETR. So looking at social media trends to counter radicalization or counter threats to internal security. And lastly, we also have the IT rules of 2021, where the first originator of information has to be talked about. There is a grievance redressal mechanism. There are nodal officers that have to be deployed in India. And I think these are brilliant steps that the government has taken. Okay. Now, what is the way forward as far as social media is considered? So firstly, we need to filter and remove terrorist and content, and especially radicalizing content, right? Then we need to have a legislative framework so that we can punish and penalize people for irresponsible content. Now here we can take the example of Germany's NetzDG Act, right? So there is a 50 million euro penalty if, for example, you deny the Holocaust in Germany. The EU also has a Digital Service Act. Then we need to have international collaboration. So there is the EU Internet Forum, which can be used as an example here. They can be the examples of public-private partnership in this space. We've already seen in our previous discussions the use of technology against terrorism, right? तो वहाँ के examples हम यहाँ लिख सकते हैं. Then we can use advanced technology to gather intelligence from social media. यहाँ पर एक keyword होता है SOCMINT or social media intelligence. And then there can be IEC campaigns, which are information awareness campaigns, where you raise awareness and you tell people that when you see posts like this, you inform the government or the relevant authorities. So this is an example here is the See Something, Say Something campaign. Now, this other thing was also in the news, which is algorithmic amplification and radicalization. What is this concept? This concept is that since the algorithm is recommendation based, right, you will technically, even if you have a slight bias, these algorithms on social media sites drive people progressively over time towards extreme content, right? So, for example, social media will learn your interests and preferences. It will give you then a personalized feed, and it will limit your exposure to diverse viewpoints. The keyword used here is called a filter bubble, right? Then it leads to the creation of an echo chamber where there is amplification of shared ideas, and your ideas, no matter how wrong they might be, then there is a confirmation bias involved and you get confirmed in that idea. Then this leads to a group polarization theory, right? So users are pushed towards more and more radical and extreme views, leading down an ideological rabbit hole. Please use these keywords in your answer, right? Echo chambers, group polarization, filter bubble, ideological rabbit hole, black box society, etc. This shows the examiner that you are well read, right? Now, why is there a challenge in stopping this radicalization on social media? Because the algorithms are opaque and they work as black boxes, like I pointed up in the just 1 minute back in this discussion. It was written right here, right? Please use these words in your answer. Then the problem is that these social media sites are completely profit driven. So virality gives profit. So virality gives profit to social media sites. So they are happy to have as many viral posts as possible. But when this virality element is given to terrorist content or to anti-national content, it becomes a problem. Then there are jurisdictional complexities. How do you apply international law in cyberspace? There might be an American company, but the content might be in India. This creates a problem. And then there is a privacy regulation dilemma. Right? Do you regulate or do you err on the side of privacy? Right. So the way forward here, you can again use this keyword, is algorithmic impact assessment. Right. And we need to have safety by design in the architecture. Right. So firstly, let users choose their own feed and let them have a mixed topic feed. Don't just create biases of the algorithm. And then we need to hide virality of at least borderline radical content. So there can be a share pause prompt. Basically, the sharing of that particular post or that particular video or reel can be stopped if the regulator feels that it is a uh, content that is harmful to internal security of a country. And lastly, we need global cooperation on this. And here again, we can talk about the Christchurch call to action. This was again, if you remember, made after the Christchurch shootings that happened in a mosque in New Zealand. And the shooting was actually live streamed on social media. So after that, this Christchurch call to action was signed. So you can also write this in your answer. But in my opinion, again, social media is very unlikely this year. So just these many keywords and we'll move on. Now, another topic which they have not asked till yet, right, and also not very likely is the Central Armed Police Forces, their mandate, their challenges, and a way forward. So, these Central Armed Police Forces are forces under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and there are about 9,64,000 personnel in them. What are the mandates of these forces? Firstly, there is the Assam Rifles. The Assam Rifles is manning the Indo-Myanmar border, and it is also involved in CI. CI here stands for Counter-Insurgency Operations. We've seen their role in Myanmar. We've seen their enhanced role because of the scrapping of the free movement regime and the situation in Myanmar, etc. Then there is the CRPF, or the Central Reserve Police Force. The Central Reserve Police Force again has counter-insurgency operations. It is mainly involved in anti-Naxal operations against the left-wing extremists, and they're also tasked sometimes with maintaining public order. Then we have the ITBP, or the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. Their main job is to look at the Indo-China border. Then there is the Border Security Force. The Border Security Force operates two borders, the Indo-Pakistan border and the Indo-Bangladesh border. Then there is the Central Industrial Security Force. They look at industrial security and the security of government offices, right? So if you go to Labasna, you'd see that there are CISF people there who are designated, and even security of places like airports, ports, etc. is done by CISF personnel. Recently, CISF has also been invited for parliamentary security. Then there is the National Security Guard. Their main job is counterterrorism, like we saw in the 2611 operations. And then there is the SSB, or the Sashastra Seema Bal, and their main job or their mandate is to look at the Indo-Nepal and Indo-Bhutan borders. Now for these CAPF forces, if in case we get a question, I've written down some common challenges and some common way forwards to answer the question, although it is again very unlikely that you'll get a question here, but I've still written them down that you have at least some keywords to write. So firstly, let's see what issues we can write about these Central Armed Police Forces. Firstly, we can write about the budgetary constraints that they face. This is a common problem across these forces because budgets are generally few and far between, so not a lot of spending on their infrastructure and their training. Then there are mental health concerns in the personnel here, because this is something that is not focused on, and I'm not saying this off a whim. There have been recent news of suicides of personnel in these forces, so mental health is not seen as a priority issue of these forces. Again, we were discussing about the post-traumatic stress disorder condition. These conditions do tend to arise in people who are constantly working in the battlefield. Then there is operational stress. There are long working hours and lots of duties that these people have to follow, so that becomes a problem. The infrastructure in these forces is not sufficient to there are a lot of personnel but not a lot of infrastructure. If you look at the police stations or their quarters, definitely needs improvement. There is also a problem of morale and pressure in the personnel. Then there is the diversion from primary duties. I think this is the major problem of this Central Armed Police Forces. I'll give you an example here. During COVID times, we asked the ITBP, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, to build a hospital for COVID-19, right, in Delhi. Now they did a wonderful job of it. I've seen that hospital did a wonderful job, and it was a great help to the entire country. But this is not their primary job, right? If you look, the CRPF very often gets diverted towards elections. Sometimes they get diverted towards VIP bandobast, right? So this is not their main job. So this diversion becomes a problem. Then in sensitive areas, such as areas like where there is left-wing extremism, or areas like Jammu and Kashmir, when these forces are deployed, there is generally a lack of proper oversight. Then there is also a strain and burden here. One more common problem which you will see at the bureaucratic level is that the chiefs of these forces are generally coming from the Indian police service. Right? So imagine someone who's become an assistant commandant in CRPF, worked their entire life in CRPF and gone up through the ranks, gotten promoted. They've worked with the CRPF throughout. And finally, when the chief has to be appointed, or positions of very high repute have to be appointed, they're given to someone who is outside the service from the Indian police service. Now, this creates resentment and this lowers morale. So, these are issues that these forces face. Now, what is the way forward? Firstly, we need to have technological advancement in these forces. And this is, I think, true for any police force in India. We need to have better training and better community relations so that human rights abuses and these problems are not brought up recently. And in this training, we also need to focus on mental health and operational pressures, right? We need to modernize their infrastructure and their equipment and expand welfare programs for these personnel. Now, we also need to have strategic deployment and deployment with regards to their actual purpose rather than them being deployed for everything that the country needs, because they also have a limited capacity. Now, the recent context is that the CISF was recently made the organization that was responsible for parliamentary security. Earlier, it was the Parliamentary Security Service. Now, although there are not a lot of concerns here, there's just one concern, that the parliament is seen as an independent body, right? Parliament is supposed to be independent. अगर parliament independent है, तो parliament में we need to also ensure that its own security staff or its own secretarial staff all forms under, जैसे लोकसभा है, तो लोकसभा का जो secretariat है, that needs to have control over all of its staff, including security staff. It is the Speaker of the Lok Sabha who is the administrative head, and all security staff of the parliament must be under her or his control. But the problem is, the moment you deploy the CISF, this thing does not happen. And CISF, again, being a central armed police force, reports to the Ministry of Home Affairs, right? And even the Article 98 of the Constitution says that the House or the legislative houses need to have their own secretarial staff. So this slight concern is there. The other concern is that the erstwhile Parliamentary Security Service, their role still remains unclear, that what happens to them now if CSF is going to be deployed in parliamentary security. So this is the recent context you can write about. All right. Let's now come to two other topics that we have to do. So we've now got to do a topic of technology in national security, again in the framework of defense reforms. So we'll first study about AI in national security, and then we'll study about drones in national security. So as far as AI is concerned, why was it in the news? Because this framework, called the Evaluating Trustworthy AI for Armed Forces framework, was launched by the Chief of Defense Staff. So what does this framework contain? It has specific measures throughout the AI developmental life cycle to make it more trustworthy for the armed forces to use them. Right? It has 5 principles that we need to focus on: privacy, on fairness, on transparency, on safety and security, and there must be reliability and robustness. Now, if you look at AI in defense, where all it is being used, so it is being used by defense forces. For example, the army has Negev AI machine guns. The Navy uses the IMAC, the Information Management and Analysis Center. For this, we also saw this in coastal security, for putting all the information together. The Air Force also used AI-based predictive maintenance system for its jets and aircraft. Now, in border defense, we've seen in Akash Tir, we've read about this system when we were reading about Operation Sindoor. So here AI is used, and Indrajal is a counter UAV system. So it counters drones, and here also AI is being used. Then in training modules of, let's say, the Sukhoi Su-30 jets, we are using AI for better training. And there is a Project Seeker of the Indian Army that is using AI for cyber attack prevention and for also offensive cyber operations, right? Now, what are the issues of using AI here? Firstly, there is a reliability problem. What if there is sometimes a bad outcome coming from an AI model? We can't risk that as far as defense is concerned. Then there is a black box problem, like we saw with social media. There is also a black box problem here, because हमें नहीं पता कि इसका algorithm कहाँ से आया है. right? So it's difficult to trust their decisions, and we don't know the back end of the system that has been made, and that is why these frameworks are important. कि जब आप AI को develop कर रहे हो तो आप इस framework को follow करो. Then there is a bias in anybody who codes for the AI. Their personal bias always gets incorporated, right? So there is objectification of human targets. There is non-incorporation of the principle of proportionality, that responses must be proportional, and then it does involve social engineering. So what are the initiatives that we have taken for AI? One is AI for National Security Defense Task Force was made, and this led to the setting up of two bodies. One was the Defense AI Council and one was the Defense AI Project Agency. We've also had a AI in Defense Symposium in 2024. So let's read this quote from the Honorable Rakshana Mantri, that timely infusion of technologies like AI and big data are the need of the hour to stay level with the technological curve. All right, let's understand the role of unmanned aerial vehicles or drones in internal security. तो पहले हम यहाँ पर क्या देखेंगे कि क्या क्या roles हैं that drones can play. Firstly, they can be used in surveillance and reconnaissance, and here are some examples. There are Heron and Switch drones that the Army and the BSF use, and they can be used in disaster response. So they were used in the Kerala floods of 2019 as well as in the Joshimath incident. They can be used for crowd management, and they were in fact used in the Kumbh Mela this year. Then they can be used for maritime security. For example, Navy has a drone called the Sea Guardian, which can be used. Then they can be used in psychological warfare and they act as deterrents. For example, अगर कोई ऐसी जगह है जहां पर drones deployed हैं, very less chances of insurgency happening in the region, even if the drone is not that effective, because insurgents don't really cross those regions. They can be used for precision targeting and they are cost effective, so much less costly than a missile would cost, for example. Now, what are the security threats from drones? Of course, they can be used for cross-border terrorism. They can be used for attack on critical infrastructure. For example, there was a UAV attack on the IAF station in Jammu recently. Sorry. Then they can also be used for espionage and surveillance. Drone swarms were seen even in Operation Sindoor, and they can also be used for carrying drugs and for drug trafficking. What are the initiatives that, this is a likely question, what are the initiatives that India has taken, or what are the technologies that we have to counter UAVs? So on the legal front, we have the drone rules of 2021. Institutionally, we have the Anti-Drone Rogue Technology Committee, which is formed under the Ministry of Home Affairs to look at these technologies. Now we have certain anti-drone systems. First is the counter drone system, or the D4 system that we use. This is a comprehensive system that can bring down drones. Then there is the Indrajal system. Indrajal is an AI-enabled system that is used for monitoring of drones, and it is used to kill drones, right? So it is an AI-enabled system, comprehensive dome. It is like a drone dome that helps in preventing drones from entering. Then there is also a DRDO anti-drone system, right? Now, the technologies that we use here, there are various technologies. The first technology is detection. There are radio frequency centers. For example, there is the L&T counter unmanned aerial system. Then there is the radar system. For example, the DRDO has an anti-drone system, and there are acoustic systems that are used. For example, drone tracker by the UK. Acoustic means sound-based system. Then there are identifying and tracking systems, especially the ones that are based on AI and ML. For example, Indrajal is one of these systems. And when it comes to neutralizing drones, there are two technologies. One is called soft kill and one is called hard kill. Soft kill is when you use radio frequency or GPS jamming to bring down the drone. The example of this is the integrated drone and interdiction system. The other one is called hard kill. The hard kill is directed energy weapon laser system. Right, hard kill is when you shoot down the drone. So you can use directed energy weapons here. Here DRDO has certain systems. We also read about the Durga, which is a directed energy weapon. Then there are kinetic interceptors. These are small caliber guns that are automated. So these guns will shoot bullets at the drone and bring the drone down. Now, for drone attacks that are happening, we need to have comprehensive national action. So we have national counter rogue drone guidelines. There need to be vulnerability assessments, and we need to strengthen the operational frameworks around this. Now, just a couple of more topics that I'll discuss with you. One is the telecom rules, because they are very much in the news, but again, if they are asked, they might be asked in GS2 from an Article 19 perspective, right? They might also be asked in cybersecurity. It's very unlikely, but since we're covering everything, why not cover this here? Then certain changes have been made to the National Security Council architecture. So I'll also be discussing with you changes that have been made here and how the National Security Council actually works and whether it is in conflict with the Cabinet Committee of Security or not. We'll also see something about the Indian Coast Guard. So we'll see this too. And we'll also see a discussion on a recent report which was talking about smuggling in India. So telecom rules have been notified under the Telecom Act that came last year, right? And they mainly talk about whether government authorities are allowed to intercept our communication through mobile phones. So in these telecom rules, what are the features? It first defines who are the authorized agencies, competent authorities, and what is an interception order. Now the procedure in this case is that मान लो आपका फोन किसी ने इंटरसेप्ट करना है और आपकी बातें सुननी है, सबसे पहले a order needs to be passed. This interception order must contain reasons, the details of the target, and the authority who is issuing this, and the duration. And this duration can be a maximum of 180 days. Then this is issued by either a joint secretary or someone higher. So it ensures that low level officials cannot target people. But in remote areas or for operational reasons, an exception has been created, and people of the rank of inspector general or above can also issue this, but there must be a 7 working days confirmation given to this order. तो सबसे पहले क्या होगा, आपके एक ऑर्डर इशू होगा, उस ऑर्डर में आपके रीजंस, डिटेल्स, किसने इशू किया है, कितने टाइम के लिए किया है, यूजुअली जॉइंट सेक्रेटरी, बट जस्ट इन केस देयर इज एन ऑपरेशनल इमरजेंसी इवन इंस्पेक्टर जनरल कैन इशू. अब इसमें कुछ सेफ गार्ड्स डाले गए हैं. क्या सेफ गार्ड्स हैं? जो भी ये ऑर्डर होगा, this order must go to the central or the state review committee within 7 working days, and here this review committee must approve this order. Central review committee at the central level is headed by the cabinet secretary, who is generally an IAS officer, and again by the chief secretary at the state level. Now the moment you read this, you should understand that there is slight problem in these rules, and we'll come to that as well, right? These rules also say that whatever data you take after interception, this data must be destroyed every 6 months. If you look at the legality of the interception, right, it comes from the Telecommunication Act of last year and the IT rules or the IT Act of 2000, where we talk of section 69. अब issues क्या हैं इसमें? One, impingement on Article 21 and right to privacy. Obviously, impingement on Article 19 and right to free speech. The definitions under the rules are fairly broad and vague. Right? For example, things like unlawful activity, very broad and vague definitions are there. Then there is no independent oversight. This is an executive-led review committee. So the cabinet secretary himself is the one who is overseeing this. So at least some independent oversight needed to be there. Executive is the one who is deciding. Executive is ultimately making these rules. This is delegated legislation. Executive makes the rules for telecom interception. Executive is the one who passes the order for telecom interception, and executive is the one who then reviews whether those orders were good or not. This does not seem like a very good application of the concept of separation of powers and checks and balances. Then there is of course a risk of mass surveillance, and there is a lack of accountability, because the fact that your records have been deleted or not, like we see that there has been got to be data deletion every 6 months, whether your records have been deleted or not, this is beyond the scope of the Right to Information Act, which then creates again a transparency issue. Then if we look at the way forward, there needs to be judicial oversight here, and clear definitions need to be there with regards to terms like public emergency or public safety, right? There need to be legal avenues to challenge any unlawful interception, and it definitely has to harmonize with global privacy norms, for example, the GDPR. Again, not a very important topic as far as internal security is concerned, but might be asked in consonance with cybersecurity, so we should be aware about them. Now, this topic is also in the news this time, which is the National Security Council. Why? Because the government has appointed an additional national security advisor to lower the burden on the current national security advisor, Shri Ajit Doval ji. तो इसमें in this topic what we are going to do, हम क्या समझने वाले हैं यहाँ पे? हम समझने वाले हैं इस पूरे सिस्टम में द आर्किटेक्चर दैट इज वर्किंग. ठीक है, ये डायग्राम थोड़ा सा आपको कॉम्प्लेक्स लग सकता है, तो स्टडी विद मी एंड आई विल ब्रेक इट डाउन फॉर यू. ठीक है, सबसे पहले देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड द कैबिनेट कमेटी ऑन सिक्योरिटी। इसमें 4 मेंबर्स हैं, द होम मिनिस्टर, डिफेंस मिनिस्टर, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर एंड द मिनिस्टर ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स। And there are 2 permanent advisees to this committee, the cabinet secretary and the defense secretary. This is headed by the prime minister. This existed even before the post of national security advisor was created. ठीक है, जब से नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइजर बना है, ऐसी ही एक और सिमिलर बॉडी बनी है विच इज कॉल्ड द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल। इस नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में भी होम मिनिस्टर, डिफेंस मिनिस्टर, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर और मिनिस्टर ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स हैं, और इसको भी जो चेयर करते हैं ऑनरेबल प्राइम मिनिस्टर ही करते हैं। The difference is that in the National Security Council, the National Security Advisor is also there. ठीक है, अब under the National Security Council, there is a National Security Council Secretariat. तो देखिए अब हम इस डायग्राम को देखते हैं, बस इतना पार्ट जितना हमें दिख रहा है। PM on top, PM heads the Cabinet Committee on Security, PM also heads the National Security Council. Cabinet Committee on Security के भी 4 मेंबर, National Security Council के भी 4 मेंबर, बट नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइजर भी हैं, और इसके नीचे एक नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल सेक्रेटेरिएट है। कोई भी काउंसिल होती है तो काउंसिल के नीचे सेक्रेटरीज होते हैं जो उस काउंसिल के डिसीजंस को इंप्लीमेंट करते हैं। यहाँ तक क्लियर। अब व्हाट हैपेंस बिलो द एनएसए, एनएसए के नीचे एक एडिशनल एनएसए है, ही इज द वन हु हैज बीन अपॉइंटेड रिसेंटली। इन एडिशनल एनएसए के नीचे और 3 लोग हैं। वन, देयर इज द नेशनल मैरिटाइम सिक्योरिटी कोऑर्डिनेटर। अब अगर मैरिटाइम सिक्योरिटी पे क्वेश्चन है तो प्लीज डू राइट अबाउट दिस एज वेल। देन देयर इज अ मिलिटरी एडवाइजर and there are 3 deputy national security advisors. Okay, so this is the structure below the NSA. The NSA is the chairman of the strategic policy group. This strategic policy group has the cabinet secretary, defense secretary, foreign secretary and 3 service chiefs. So chiefs of the army, navy and air force. अब ये strategic policy group क्या है ये भी समझते हैं, बट पहले इस डायग्राम को दोबारा देखो। ये जो ब्लैक में ये जो बना है, ये this is the National Security Council Secretariat. This secretariat is for the National Security Council. There is the Cabinet Committee on Security, इसके भी 4 मेंबर, NSC के भी 4 मेंबर। NSC को हेड करते हैं PM, NSC में NSA भी है, और ये जो रिवर्स L शेप का डायग्राम है, ये नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल सेक्रेटेरिएट है, राइट। अब if you look at the National Security Council, this was constituted on the recommendation of the KC Panth Task Force. This is the apex advisory body headed by the PM on all national security matters. This promotes integrated thinking and coordinated application of resources. इसमें 3 tiers हैं नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में। एक स्ट्रेटेजिक पॉलिसी ग्रुप है, राइट, दिस इज द ग्रुप फॉर इंटर मिनिस्ट्रियल कोऑर्डिनेशन, और ये वही ग्रुप है जिसमें कैबिनेट सेक्रेटरी, डिफेंस सेक्रेटरी, फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी हैं। देन देयर इज द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइजरी बोर्ड फॉर लॉन्ग टर्म एनालिसिस एंड पर्सपेक्टिव्स, एंड देयर इज द जॉइंट इंटेलिजेंस कमिटी, जहाँ पर सारी इंटेलिजेंस को जॉइंटली, जितनी भी एजेंसीज हैं, रॉ, आईबी, जो जॉइंट इंटेलिजेंस है उसको यहाँ पर एनालाइज किया जाता है, राइट। अब द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल सेक्रेटेरिएट इज द सेक्रेटेरिएट ऑफ द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल, और इसका काम कोई भी डिसीजन मेकिंग का नहीं है, डिसीजन मेकिंग काउंसिल में ही होगी। सेक्रेटेरिएट में ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हैं, तो ब्यूरोक्रेट्स का काम या सिविल सर्वेंट्स का काम क्या है, एप्लीकेशन, तो दे विल डू एनालिसिस, कोऑर्डिनेशन, इंप्लीमेंटेशन, फॉलो अप एंड सपोर्ट। फंक्शंस ऑफ द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइजर, क्या क्या काम होते हैं नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइजर के, क्यों इंपॉर्टेंट है, बिकॉज अगेन एडिशनल एनएसए हैज बीन अपॉइंटेड। ही इज द प्रिंसिपल एडवाइजर टू द ऑनरेबल प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑन नेशनल सिक्योरिटी इश्यूज। ही इज द हेड ऑफ द नेशनल सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल सेक्रेटेरिएट। ही प्रोवाइड्स इंटरफेस बिटवीन इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसीज, सो रिसर्च एंड एनालिसिस विंग, आईबी, एनटीआरओ एक्सेट्रा। He is supposed to lead the national response to the security crisis. He provides inter-ministerial coordination, and he also supervises the nuclear command and control structure. Now, another news was that smuggling पे एक specific news आई थी, smuggling in India report आई थी। ये जब हम organized crime वाला topic देख रहे थे तो उसमें हमने recent context में देखा था, but a little bit more about smuggling in case you get a detailed question. तो स्मगलिंग में राइज क्यों देखा गया है, इसी रिपोर्ट से कोट कर रहा हूँ। ए, बिकॉज देयर बीन अ राइज इन द डिमांड फॉर गोल्ड, दिस इज वन ऑफ द रीजंस। देन इंडिया इज लोकेटेड बिटवीन द डेथ क्रीसेंट एंड द डेथ ट्रायंगल, तो ड्रग स्मगलिंग बढ़ रही है। देन लीगल लूप होल्स एंड फ्री ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट्स आर बीइंग मिसयूज्ड फॉर दिस, एंड न्यू टेक्नोलॉजीज लाइक डार्क नेट एंड क्रिप्टो करेंसी आर ऑल्सो लीडिंग टू स्मगलिंग। अब इससे क्या सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट्स हैं फ्रॉम स्मगलिंग? ऑफ कोर्स देयर इज द आइडिया ऑफ नारकोटिक्स एज एन ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम एज वेल एज नार्को टेररिज्म, a problem of commercial fraud, there is a problem of financial instability. ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग कैन बी ऑन द राइज एंड न्यू डायमेंशन हमने FATF की रिपोर्ट में भी देखा था, वाइल्ड लाइफ एंड एनवायरमेंटल क्राइम्स आर ऑन द राइज. So what are the initiatives that have been taken to counter smuggling? One is this act. This is broadly known as the COFE-POSA Act. Has been in the news also this time. So this act. Then there is the BNS, which is in which smuggling is punishable and it is a organized crime. ये भी हमने देखा था. Section 111 of the भारतीय न्याय संहिता. Then UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act में भी smuggling को एक terrorist act बताया गया है. There is a Customs Act, there is the National Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. इसको हमने देखा था when we were looking at the NIA. And lastly, there is the Wildlife Protection Act. इसमें amendment हुई है so that customs officers can seize illegal wildlife items. Now, institutional measures अगर हम देखें, there is the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which is the apex anti-smuggling body. And अगर international coordination और international initiatives की बात करें, so there are global mutual assistance agreements. There is the World Customs Organization, there is Interpol के बारे में भी हमने पढ़ा है, and globally there is the CITES, which is the Convention on Stopping the International Trade of Endangered Species, as well as the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Last news that we have to see in internal security is about the Indian Coast Guard. This was in the news because the Coast Guard Act of 1978 was being reviewed. तो Coast Guard के roles क्या हैं? Coastal surveillance and patrolling. Just correct this. Sorry, it is patrolling, right? Then it is involved in anti-smuggling and anti-poaching operations. It also does search and rescue operations through maritime rescue coordination centers. Marine pollution में भी इसका रोल रहा है, जैसे चेन्नई कोस्ट पे जब marine spill हुआ था in 2021, they looked at this. It also looks at humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and protection of offshore assets such as Bombay High Refinery, etc. Now, what are the initiatives that we have taken? We've tried to modernize the fleet. For example, the recent Indian Coast Guard ship Shaksham was deployed. It talks of coastal security networks, and it also looks at interagency coordination through Operation Sajag, which was a coastal security exercise जहां हमने Navy, Marine Police, Fisheries Department और Coast Guard को साथ में लेके आया. Now, this ends our discussion on internal security. And